In a fog-choked London night, a single note from a violin shatters the silence of the Royal Opera House, and a virtuoso collapses, her fingers burned by strings that hum with a life of their own. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson plunge into a chilling mystery. Who crafted these cursed strings that bend minds and sway empires? From shadowy Vienna guilds to New York's haunted theaters, they unravel a conspiracy led by a secret society, the Order of the Lyre, aiming to control the world's leaders through a hypnotic melody. Why do the strings burn? What ancient alchemy fuels their power? And can Holmes stop the final symphony before it enslaves a city, or will the music claim him too? Chapter 1. The haunting melody. The fog clung to London streets like a conspirator, muffling the clatter of hooves and the creak of carriage wheels as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson emerged from their hansom cab. The night was sharp with November's bite, and the gaslights flickered, casting uncertain shadows on the cobblestones outside the Adelphi Theatre. The marquee glowed faintly, proclaiming an evening with Eleanor Grayson, virtuoso of the violin. Yet, as Holmes adjusted his scarf, his keen eyes caught a ripple of unease among the crowd spilling from the theater's ornate doors. Whispers of panic, not applause. "Something's amiss, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice low and precise, like a blade slicing through the fog. "The audience departs too soon, and with such agitation. A performance cut short is rarely a trifling matter." Watson, bundled in his overcoat, squinted through the mist. "Perhaps Miss Grayson fell ill? These virtuosos are a delicate lot, or so I've heard." Holmes's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. "Delicate, perhaps, but Eleanor Grayson is renowned for her iron will. No, this is no mere indisposition. Come, let us investigate." They pressed through the throng, Holmes's lean frame weaving effortlessly past flustered gentlemen and ladies, clutching their opera glasses. Inside, the theater's grandeur was dimmed by chaos. Ushers darted about, their polished demeanor frayed, while a cluster of patrons near the stage muttered in low, urgent tones. The air carried a faint, discordant hum, a sound that prickled Watson's skin, though he couldn't place why. Holmes's gaze swept the scene, cataloging details with the precision of a watchmaker. The crimson velvet curtains hung askew, as if torn in haste. A discarded program lay trampled on the floor, its ink smudged but legible. Paganini's Caprice No. 24, a piece demanding fiendish skill. And there on the stage lay a violin, its strings glinting under the gaslights with an unnatural sheen, as if they pulsed with a life of their own. "Watson, observe the strings," Holmes said, striding toward the stage with purpose. "They are not gut nor steel, but something else." Watson followed, his medical instincts alert. "You think the violin itself caused this commotion?" "Not the violin, but what it bears." Holmes knelt beside the instrument, his gloved fingers hovering over the strings without touching them. "See the inscription here, etched faintly along the bridge. It's in Latin cave Feli Sonum. Beware the cat sound. Curious, don't you think?" Before Watson could respond, a theater manager, a portly man with a wilting mustache, bustled over, wringing his hands. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank heavens you're here." "It's Miss Grayson." She collapsed mid-performance, right as she played that infernal piece. The audience, they were entranced, then terrified. Some claim the music itself cursed her. Holmes's eyes narrowed, his mind already sifting fact from hysteria. Where is Miss Grayson now? In her dressing room, under the care of a physician. But the violin people say it's haunted. Those strings, they hummed even after she fell, as if playing themselves. "Superstition is a poor substitute for observation," Holmes replied coolly. "Lead us to her, and quickly." The manager guided them through a maze of backstage corridors where the air grew thick with the scent of grease paint and roses. The hum lingered in Watson's ears, faint but persistent, like a memory he couldn't shake. He glanced at Holmes, whose expression betrayed nothing but the faintest spark of intrigue. Miss Eleanor Grayson's dressing room was a sanctuary of opulence, its walls draped in sapphire silk, a gilded mirror reflecting the flicker of a single candle. The violinist sat on a velvet chaise, her face pale as moonlight, her raven hair loosened from its elegant chignon. A physician, an elderly man with a dour face, was packing his bag, muttering about nervous exhaustion. Eleanor's hands, delicate yet calloused from years of mastery, trembled slightly as she clutched a glass of water. "Miss Grayson," Holmes said, his tone measured yet commanding attention. "I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my associate, Dr. Watson. We are here to understand what transpired tonight." Her eyes, a piercing emerald, met his with a mixture of relief and wariness. "Mr. Holmes, I've heard of your methods, but this is no ordinary matter. The strings there. Cursed, I tell you." Watson stepped forward, his voice gentle. "May I examine you, Miss Grayson? Your collapse could have a medical cause, curse or no." She nodded, and Watson checked her pulse, noting its erratic rhythm. "Your heart rate is elevated, but that could be shock. Any pain or unusual sensations during the performance?" "It was the music," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "As I played the caprice, the strings felt alive. They vibrated against my fingers, burning them. The sound, it wasn't mine. It was as if the violin played me." Holmes leaned closer, his gaze fixed on her hands. "May I see your fingers?" She extended them, revealing faint red marks like burns across her fingertips. Holmes produced a magnifying glass and studied the marks with intense focus. "These are not typical burns," he murmured. "The pattern suggests a chemical reaction, not mere friction. Tell me, Miss Grayson, where did you acquire these strings?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the violin on a nearby table. "They were a gift, sent anonymously 3 days ago." A parcel arrived with a note, written in elegant hand. It said the strings would elevate my art to divine heights, but to beware their power. I thought it a jest, until tonight. Holmes's expression sharpened. "The note, do you still have it?" Eleanor rose unsteadily and retrieved a small wooden box from her vanity. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a folded parchment. Holmes unfolded it with care, his eyes scanning the script. The ink was a deep indigo, the words precise. "These strings sing of eternity, but their song demands a price. Play with care, lest the cat's cry claim you." "Curiouser and curiouser," Holmes said, folding the note into his pocket. "And the box any markings?" Eleanor pointed to the lid, where a faint symbol was carved, a crescent moon entwined with a lyre. "I didn't notice it until now," she admitted. Holmes traced the symbol with a gloved finger. "This is no common emblem. It suggests a maker with esoteric leanings. Watson, we must examine the violin itself. Miss Grayson, with your permission?" She nodded, though her eyes betrayed fear. Holmes lifted the violin, his movements deliberate, as if handling a live serpent. The strings gleamed under the candlelight, their surface almost liquid in its sheen. He plucked one gently, and the room filled with a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in Watson's chest, stirring an inexplicable unease. "Remarkable," Holmes said, his voice tinged with fascination. "The tone is unnatural, far beyond the range of ordinary strings. Watson, note the resonance. It persists far longer than it should." Watson, ever the skeptic, frowned. Could it be a trick of the theater's acoustics? Or perhaps a new alloy? "Possibly," Holmes replied, "but alloys don't burn flesh or inspire mass hysteria. This is no mere metallurgy. We are dealing with a deliberate design, one meant to provoke or control." The physician, who had lingered silently, cleared his throat. "If I may, Mr. Holmes, I've seen cases of mass suggestion before. Music can stir the mind to strange fancies. Perhaps the audience's panic was merely collective nerves." Holmes's eyes glinted with impatience. "Dr. Hargrove, your diagnosis assumes a mundane cause. Yet you heard the strings hum, did you not? It lingers in the mind, does it not?" Hargrove paled, nodding reluctantly. "It does. I can't explain it." "Then leave explanations to me," Holmes said, turning back to Eleanor. "Miss Grayson, I advise you to refrain from playing this violin until I've investigated further. Watson will take a sample of the strings for analysis. A single strand should suffice." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "Take it, Mr. Holmes, but be careful. I fear those strings have a will of their own." Holmes produced a small knife and with surgical precision severed a short length of one string. It resisted briefly, as if reluctant to part from the violin, then snapped with a faint, mournful note. He sealed it in a glass vial, which he tucked into his coat as they prepared to leave. Watson noticed a shadow pass across the dressing-room window, a fleeting silhouette, gone before he could be sure. "Holmes, did you see?" "I did," Holmes interrupted, his voice low. "We are not alone in our interest. Someone watches, and they are not idle spectators." They stepped back into the fog-choked night, the theater's lights fading behind them. The hum of the strings seemed to follow, a ghostly echo in the air. Watson shivered, not from the cold, but from the sense that they had stumbled into a mystery far deeper than a mere performance gone awry. "Holmes," Watson said as they climbed into their cab, "do you truly believe in a curse?" Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "I believe in facts, Watson, and the facts suggest these strings are no ordinary creation. Whether curse or cunning, I intend to uncover their truth. To Baker Street, we have work to do." The cab rattled into the night, carrying them toward a mystery that sang of danger and enigma. Holmes leaned back, his mind already dissecting the clues. The inscription, the burns, the symbol, the note. Somewhere in their tangle lay the key to the cursed violin strings, and he would not rest until it was his. The theater faded into the fog, but its secrets lingered, a haunting melody that promised more questions than answers. For Sherlock Holmes, the game was afoot, and the first note had been struck. Chapter 2. The Violinist's Secret. The fog clung to London like a conspirator, its tendrils curling around the gas lamps that flickered weakly against the dusk. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson navigated the labyrinthine streets of Mayfair, their footsteps muffled by the damp cobblestones. The air was heavy with the scent of coal smoke and wet wool, a fitting shroud for the mystery that had drawn them from the warmth of 221B Baker Street to the opulent townhouse of Miss Eleanor Grayson, the violinist whose collapse at the Royal Concert Hall had set tongues wagging across the city. Holmes, his sharp eyes scanning the facades of the grand houses, walked with a purpose that belied the casual tilt of his deerstalker. "The public loves a ghost story, Watson," he remarked, his voice low but laced with a trace of amusement. "Cursed violin strings. The very notion is absurd, yet it has gripped the imagination of London's elite. There is something tangible behind this hysteria, and I mean to find it." Watson, bundled in his overcoat against the evening chill, gave a skeptical huff. "Tangible?" Holmes, the woman collapsed mid-performance, her bow trembling as if the devil himself were guiding it. "The audience swears they heard the strings hum after she fell without a hand touching them. If that's not supernatural, what is it?" Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. "The human mind, Watson, is a far more cunning conjurer than any specter. Fear amplifies the senses, distorts reality. I suspect we'll find a more terrestrial explanation, perhaps one rooted in chemistry or craftsmanship." They arrived at a townhouse of pale stone, its windows glowing with the soft amber of candlelight. A brass knocker shaped like a lyre adorned the door, a nod to the occupant's profession. Holmes rapped sharply, and moments later, a butler with a face as impassive as a gravestone ushered them into a foyer adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors and delicate porcelain vases. Miss Eleanor Grayson awaited them in a drawing room that seemed to hum with the weight of its own elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic glints across walls papered in deep burgundy, and a grand piano stood sentinel in one corner, its polished surface reflecting the firelight. The violinist herself sat near the hearth, her slender frame draped. In a gown of midnight blue, her auburn hair pinned loosely, as if she had not the strength to tame it fully. Her hands, folded in her lap, trembled faintly, and Watson noted a bandage wrapped around the fingers of her right hand. "Mr. Holmes." "Dr. Watson," she said, her voice soft but carrying the refined cadence of one trained to command an audience. "I am grateful you've come. The events of last night, they have left me quite undone." Holmes took the offered seat, his posture relaxed but his eyes darting over every detail of the room, the half-empty teacup on the side table, the faint scuff on the carpet near the window, the violin case resting on a velvet cushion as if it were a relic. "Miss Grayson," he began, "your performance was interrupted by an extraordinary event. The papers are ablaze with tales of cursed strings. I prefer facts. Tell me everything from the moment you received these strings." Eleanor's gaze flickered to the violin case, and a shadow crossed her face. "It began 3 weeks ago," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A parcel arrived at my dressing room at the concert hall. No sender's name, no address, just a small wooden box, exquisitely carved, containing 4 violin strings. They were unlike any I'd seen, almost luminous with a faint silver sheen. Accompanying them was a note." She reached for a drawer. In the side table, her movements slow, as if the memory itself were a weight, she handed Holmes a slip of parchment, its edges yellowed. The writing was in an elegant, looping script. "Play these strings, and the world will hear your soul. But beware, they carry a curse that binds the player to their song." Holmes's eyes narrowed as he studied the note, holding it to the light. No watermark, no distinctive ink. Common paper, yet the hand is practiced, deliberate. And the strings themselves? Eleanor hesitated, then rose and opened the violin case. The instrument within was a Stradivarius, its varnish gleaming like polished amber. The strings, however, were the true anomaly, taut and shimmering. They seemed to catch the firelight in a way that made them pulse faintly, as if alive. Holmes leaned closer, his magnifying glass in hand, and examined the strings without touching them. "An inscription," he murmured, pointing to a series of minuscule etchings along the length of the E string, barely visible to the naked eye. "Not English, perhaps Latin or something older." Watson peered over his shoulder, squinting. "Can you read it?" "Not yet," Holmes replied, his tone brisk. "But it confirms my suspicion that these strings are no ordinary craftsmanship. Miss Grayson, when did you first notice their peculiarities?" She sat again, her hands clasped tightly. "The moment I played them. The sound was extraordinarily rich, resonant, almost hypnotic. Audiences were enraptured, but I began to feel strange. During rehearsals, my fingers would burn where they touched the strings, as if they were too hot or too cold. And the music, it seemed to linger in my mind, even when I wasn't playing. Then, last night, during the concerto." Her voice broke, and she pressed a hand to her lips. It was as if the violin played itself. My hands moved, but I wasn't in control. The melody grew wild, discordant, and then darkness. Watson, ever the physician, leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Miss Grayson, may I examine your hands?" She nodded, unwrapping the bandage on her right hand. Watson inhaled sharply. The tips of her index and middle fingers bore faint, crescent-shaped burns, the skin red and blistered. "These are not typical burns," he said, glancing at Holmes. "They're precise, almost as if branded." Holmes's gaze was fixed on the violin. "Miss Grayson, have you altered the strings since receiving them? Adjusted their tension, perhaps?" "No," she replied. I was afraid to. They felt wrong somehow. As if they were watching me. She laughed nervously, then caught herself. I know how that sounds, Mr. Holmes, but I swear there's something unnatural about them. Holmes stood abruptly, his movements precise as he donned his gloves. With your permission, I'd like to take a sample of one string for analysis. A small segment will suffice. Eleanor hesitated, her eyes darting to the violin. Will it anger them? Holmes's expression softened, though his tone remained firm. Miss Grayson, whatever power these strings hold, it is not supernatural. It is a matter of science, chemistry, physics, perhaps psychology. I will find the truth. She nodded, and Holmes, with the precision of a surgeon, used a small pair of shears to snip a half-inch segment from the A string. The moment the blade touched it, a faint, discordant hum filled the room, like the dying echo of a tuning fork. Watson shivered, but Holmes merely pocketed the sample in a small tin case, his face unreadable dot as they prepared to leave. Watson lingered, his concern evident. Miss Grayson, you should rest. And avoid playing that violin until we know more. She offered a wan smile. I fear I may not have a choice, Dr. Watson. The music. It calls to me. Outside, the fog had thickened, swallowing the street in a gray haze. Holmes walked briskly, his mind already turning over the clues. The burns, Watson, he said suddenly. Not thermal, not chemical in the usual sense. They suggest a reaction, perhaps, to a metal or alloy, and that hum. It's not a natural resonance. Something in the string's composition is amplifying sound beyond normal limits. Watson struggled to keep pace. You think someone engineered these strings to cause harm? Not harm, necessarily, Holmes replied. Control, perhaps, influence. The hypnotic effect Miss Grayson described is no mere fancy. Music has long been used to sway emotions. Consider the Pied Piper, or the sirens of myth. If these strings can manipulate an audience's mind. He trailed off, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the chase. Their cab rattled through the fog, and Holmes leaned back, his fingers steepled. We need a chemist, Watson. Someone with expertise in rare metals and acoustics. Dr. Mortimer Finch, perhaps. He's a recluse but brilliant. Tomorrow we'll visit his laboratory. For now, let us return to Baker Street. I have some reading to do on ancient inscriptions. As the cab clattered on, Watson glanced at the tin case in Holmes's pocket, half expecting to hear that eerie hum again. The mystery was deepening, and though he trusted Holmes's logic, a small part of him wondered if they were chasing something more sinister than science could explain. The next morning, Baker Street was a hive of activity. Holmes, clad in his dressing gown, had spent the night poring over texts on ancient scripts and metallurgy, his desk a chaos of open books and scribbled notes. Watson, nursing a cup of Mrs. Hudson's tea, watched as Holmes held the string segment under a microscope, muttering to himself. Fascinating, Holmes said at last, looking up. The inscription is in a dialect of Old High German, rarely used after the 10th century. It translates roughly to "the song binds the soul," a poetic flourish, but it suggests intent. Whoever crafted these strings meant for them to have an effect beyond mere music. Watson frowned. But why give them to Miss Grayson? She's a performer, not a scientist or a mystic. Why target her? Holmes's eyes gleamed. That, Watson, is the heart of the matter. Miss Grayson is a conduit, a means to reach her audience. Her performances draw London's elite, politicians, industrialists, even royalty. If someone seeks to influence such a crowd. He left the thought unfinished, rising to fetch his coat. Come, Watson, Dr. Finch awaits. Dr. Mortimer Finch's laboratory was tucked away in a crumbling alley near the Thames, its entrance marked only by a rusted sign reading, Finch and Sons, Apothecary. The air inside was thick with the acrid tang of chemicals, and shelves groaned under the weight of glass vials, dusty tomes, and strange contraptions. Finch himself was a wiry man with wild white hair and spectacles perched precariously on his nose, his hands stained with ink and reagents. "Holmes!" Finch barked, barely looking up from a bubbling retort. "What's this about cursed strings? I've no time for nonsense." Holmes placed the tin case on the workbench. "No nonsense, Finch. A sample of a violin string that produces an unnatural resonance and causes physical harm to its player. I need your expertise on its composition." Finch's curiosity overcame his gruffness. He took the sample, holding it to the light with a pair of tongs. "Peculiar," he muttered. "Metallic, but too light for steel, and this sheen, almost like mercury." He set to work, dissolving a fragment in acid, testing it with a spectroscope, and consulting a battered notebook filled with cryptic symbols. After an hour, Finch looked up, his face pale. "This is no ordinary alloy, Holmes. It's a blend of silver, palladium, and something I can't identify, possibly a rare earth element. The structure is designed to conduct sound at an amplified frequency, almost like a tuning fork that never stops. It could induce a trance-like state in listeners, even disrupt neural patterns." Watson's eyes widened. "You mean it could control minds?" Finch snorted. "Control is a strong word. Influence, perhaps. Prolonged exposure might cause suggestibility, even hallucinations. There are historical accounts unverified. Mind you, of a 17th century alchemist, Hans von Richter, who crafted similar strings for a Viennese court. They were banned after players went mad." Holmes's expression was grim. Von Richter, a name to pursue. Where might such an alloy be sourced today? Finch scratched his chin. "Vienna, still. The city's guilds have long guarded secrets of metallurgy. But this craftsmanship suggests a single maker, someone with access to rare materials and ancient knowledge. I'd start with the luthier's men like Gustav Heller, though he's a recluse now, rumored to live in the shadows of the Stephansdom." Holmes nodded, already turning to leave. "Thank you, Finch. Watson, we're bound for Vienna. Pack lightly, we may need to move quickly." As they stepped back into the smoggy London air, Watson felt a chill that had little to do with the weather. The cursed strings were no mere curiosity, they were a weapon, and someone had wielded them with precision. The trail was leading them across Europe, into a world of secrets and shadows, and Watson could only hope Holmes's brilliance would outshine the darkness they were about to face. Chapter 3. The chemist's revelation. The fog clung to Baker Street like a conspirator, shrouding the gas lamps in a ghostly haze as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson descended from their hansom cab. The air was thick with the scent of coal, smoke, and damp earth, a quintessential London evening in late autumn. Holmes, his sharp eyes glinting beneath the brim of his deerstalker, clutched a small wooden case containing the mysterious violin string sample from Miss Eleanor Grayson's cursed instrument. His stride was purposeful, his mind already dissecting the puzzle that had drawn them from the opulent townhouse of the trembling violinist to this quieter corner of the city. Watson, ever the steadfast companion, adjusted his overcoat against the chill. "Holmes, are you certain this Dr. Finch will see us at this hour? It's nearly 9, and the man's reputation suggests he's not fond of unannounced visitors." Holmes's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "My dear Watson, Dr. Mortimer Finch is a creature of habit, and his habits are nocturnal. He'll be awake, poring over his beakers and burners, as surely as the Thames flows eastward. Besides, I sent a telegram this afternoon. He's expecting us." They approached a narrow, unassuming door tucked between a shuttered bookshop and a tobacconist's. The brass plaque, tarnished and barely legible, read, "Finch, chemist and analyst." Holmes rapped sharply, the sound echoing in the stillness. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a gaunt figure in a stained laboratory coat. Dr. Mortimer Finch was a man of indeterminate age, his face a map of deep lines and sharp, angles framed by a shock of white hair that seemed to defy gravity. His eyes, magnified by thick spectacles, darted between Holmes and Watson with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. "Mr. Holmes," Finch said, his voice a dry rasp, "your telegram was characteristically cryptic. A matter of urgent chemical inquiry, you said. I trust this isn't some trivial request for a patent remedy?" Holmes's smile widened. "Hardly, Dr. Finch. I bring you a puzzle that may challenge even your formidable expertise. May we enter?" Finch hesitated, then stepped aside, gesturing them into a cluttered laboratory that smelled of sulfur and old books. The room was a chaos of scientific instruments, glass retorts bubbling over Bunsen burners, shelves groaning under the weight of dusty tomes, and a long workbench littered with vials, pipettes, and strange metallic contraptions. A single oil lamp cast flickering shadows, lending the space an almost alchemical air. Watson's gaze lingered on a peculiar device in the corner, a brass contraption with spinning gears and a glass dome, emitting a faint hum. "Good Lord, Holmes, this place looks like the lair of a mad scientist." Finch bristled, adjusting his spectacles. "Mad? No, Dr. Watson. Methodical. Science demands precision, not lunacy. Now, what is this puzzle you've brought?" Holmes opened the wooden case and extracted a single violin string, its surface glinting with an unnatural sheen under the lamplight. He placed it on a clean glass slide and handed it to Finch. "This, Dr. Finch, is no ordinary string. It was part of an instrument played by Miss Eleanor Grayson, who collapsed during a performance under unusual circumstances. The string bears an inscription, barely visible, and its tone is said to possess a hypnotic quality. I need to know its composition and origin." Finch's eyes narrowed as he held the slide to the light, squinting at the string. "Hypnotic, you say? Preposterous. Sound is merely vibration, a matter of physics, not mysticism." Yet his fingers trembled slightly as he placed the slide under a microscope, adjusting the lenses with practiced precision. After a moment, he muttered, "Curious. The surface is irregular, almost crystalline. Not gut nor steel, something else entirely." Holmes leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "What else, Dr. Finch?" "I've reason to believe this string is connected to a series of incidents, collapses, trances, even whispers of a curse. Its material may hold the key." Finch snorted, but his curiosity was piqued. He moved to a spectroscope, a hulking machine of brass and glass, and began preparing the string for analysis. "A curse, Mr. Holmes. You, of all people, should know. Better, but I'll humor you. Let's see what secrets this string holds." As Finch worked, Watson wandered the laboratory, his medical curiosity drawn to a shelf of ancient texts. One caught his eye, a leather-bound volume titled De Metallis. Sonorous, its pages yellowed and brittle. He opened it cautiously, revealing intricate diagrams of musical instruments alongside Latin text describing metals that sing to the soul. Watson's brow furrowed. "Holmes, this book. It mentions alloys used in music, said to influence the mind. Could it be related?" Holmes glanced over, his eyes gleaming. "Well spotted, Watson. Dr. Finch, have you encountered references to such alloys in your studies?" Finch, engrossed in the spectroscope, didn't look up. Old alchemical nonsense. The 17th century was rife with charlatans claiming metals could hold mystical properties. But he paused, his voice catching as the spectroscope's readings flickered across a glass plate. "This is extraordinary. The string contains a rare alloy, primarily tungsten and palladium, with traces of an element I can't immediately identify. It's not on any standard periodic table I know." Holmes's fingers drummed lightly on the workbench. Tungsten and palladium, an unusual combination for a violin string. And the unidentified element? Finch adjusted the machine, his face pale. "It's anomalous. The spectral lines suggest something akin to a lanthanide, but its behavior is unstable. almost as if it's reacting to the air. I'd need to run further tests, but this alloy is designed to amplify vibrations far beyond normal capacity. The sound it produces could resonate at frequencies that affect the nervous system. Watson's jaw tightened. Affect how, exactly? Could it explain Miss Grayson's collapse? Finch hesitated, then nodded. Possibly. Certain frequencies can induce vertigo, disorientation, even hallucinations. If this alloy enhances those effects, it could make the listener or the player susceptible to unusual mental states. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Unusual enough to be mistaken for a curse? Finch scoffed, but his bravado faltered. I don't deal in curses, Mr. Holmes, but I'll concede this alloy is no accident. Its creation required advanced metallurgical knowledge, far beyond what's common today. It reminds me of a legend I came across years ago, during my studies in Leipzig. Watson leaned closer, intrigued. A legend? Finch sighed, removing his spectacles to rub his eyes. A tale from the 17th century, about an alchemist named Heinrich Voss. He was obsessed with the idea that music could control the mind. He claimed to have forged a metal, the singing alloy, he called it, that could imbue instruments with unnatural power. The story goes that his creations drove musicians mad, their melodies weaving spells over listeners. Voss disappeared after a fire destroyed his workshop in Vienna, and his secrets were thought lost. But this string, he gestured to the slide. It matches the descriptions in the old texts. Holmes's gaze was razor sharp. Vienna, you say? And this Heinrich Voss, any record of his descendants or followers? Finch shrugged, returning to his workbench. The Voss name appears in scattered records, mostly tied to instrument makers or obscure patrons of the arts. I'd start with Vienna's Guild of Luthiers. They're a secretive lot, hoarding knowledge. Like misers, if anyone knows more about this alloy, it's them. Holmes paced the room, his mind racing. Then Vienna is our next destination. But first, Dr. Finch, I need you to isolate that unidentified element. Its properties may hold the key to this mystery. Finch grumbled, but set to work, grinding a fragment of the string into a fine powder for further analysis. As he did, Watson flipped through De Metallis Sonoris, pausing at a faded illustration of a violin with strings that seemed to glow. The caption, in Latin, read, Per sonum mens regitur. Through sound the mind is ruled. He shivered, closing the book. Holmes, this feels bigger than a single violinist's collapse. If these strings can manipulate minds, what's to stop someone from using them on a larger scale? Holmes stopped pacing, his expression grave. Precisely, Watson. The question is not only how these strings were made, but why? And who stands to gain from their power? As Finch worked, the laboratory grew quieter, the only sounds the hiss of the Bunsen burner and the faint ticking of a clock. Then, a sharp crack broke the silence. Finch yelped, stumbling back from his workbench. The vial containing the string's powder had shattered, its contents fizzing and sparking on the table. A faint, discordant hum filled the air like a violin. Played out of tune, good God! Watson exclaimed, stepping back. What's happening? Finch, wide-eyed, grabbed a pair of tongs and swept the powder into a lead-lined box, slamming it shut. The hum ceased, leaving an eerie stillness. That was no ordinary reaction, he stammered. The powder reacted to the flames. Heat, releasing energy in a way I've never seen. It's as if the alloy is alive. Holmes's eyes gleamed with fascination. Alive? No, Dr. Finch. Engineered. Someone designed this alloy to respond to specific stimulus, sound, heat, perhaps even intent. We're dealing with a mind as meticulous as it is dangerous. Watson's hand rested on his revolver, a habit born of too many close calls. Holmes, if this alloy is as potent as Finch claims, we can't let it fall into the wrong hands. Who could craft such a thing today? Holmes's gaze drifted to the lead box, his mind already charting the path ahead. That, Watson, is what we'll discover in Vienna. Dr. Finch, I trust you'll keep this sample secure and continue your analysis. Send any findings to me care of the British Embassy in Vienna. Finch nodded, still shaken. I'll do what I can, Mr. Holmes. But be careful. If this alloy is tied to Voss's legacy, you're stepping into a world that doesn't take kindly to outsiders. Holmes's smile was grim. I've never been one for polite welcomes, Dr. Finch. Come, Watson, we have a train to catch. As they stepped back into the fog, Watson glanced at Holmes, his friend's silhouette cutting through the mist like a blade. Vienna, then. But Holmes, this alloy, it's not just science, is it? There's something almost diabolical about it. Holmes's voice was low, resolute. Diabolical or not, Watson, it's a puzzle. And I intend to solve it, piece by piece, until the truth hums as clearly as that cursed string. The cab rattled away into the night, carrying them toward a mystery that grew darker with every revelation, the faint echo of a haunting melody lingering in their minds. Chapter 4. Shadows in Vienna. The train rattled through the Austrian countryside, its rhythm a steady counterpoint to the restless energy in Sherlock Holmes's sharp gray eyes. Seated across from him in the plush first-class compartment, Dr. John. Watson scribbled in his notebook, trying to capture the fleeting details of their journey from London. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and coal smoke, and outside, the Alps loomed like silent sentinels under a bruised autumn sky. Vienna, Holmes murmured, his voice low, almost lost in the clatter of the wheels. A city of music, art, and secrets. If the cursed strings have a cradle, it's here. Watson glanced up, his pen pausing. You're certain this alloy Dr. Finch identified points to Vienna? It seems a long way to go on a chemist's hunch. Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. Finch's analysis was no hunch, Watson. The alloy nickel, cobalt, and a trace of an unknown element matches records of a Viennese craftsman from the 17th century, one Jakob Steiner. His instruments were legendary, said to sing with a voice that could stir souls, or, in our case, unsettle them. Watson frowned, closing his notebook. And you think this Steiner's work is tied to a secret society? It sounds like something out of a penny dreadful. Precisely why we're here, Holmes replied, his gaze fixed on the window. The truth often hides behind the absurd. That ledger we'll seek in Vienna, it's the key to unraveling this tangle of superstition and science. The train slowed as Vienna's spires came into view, their golden tips catching the last light of day. Holmes and Watson disembarked at the bustling Westbahnhof, the air alive with the chatter of German, Hungarian, and Czech voices. Porters darted through the crowd, their shouts mingling with the distant strains of a street violinist playing a mournful waltz. Holmes's eyes narrowed, as if the music itself carried a clue. Their destination was a narrow street in the Alsergrund district, home to the Guild of Luthiers, a centuries-old enclave of instrument makers. Holmes had secured an introduction through a contact at the British Embassy, posing as a wealthy English collector seeking rare violins. Watson, less comfortable with deception, adjusted his tie and muttered, "I hope you know what you're doing, Holmes. These guilds are tight-knit. They'll smell a fraud a mile off." "Then we must be convincing," Holmes said, pulling his coat tighter against the evening chill. "Follow my lead and keep your revolver close. Vienna's shadows are not as welcoming as her music." The Guildhall was a Gothic relic, its facade carved with cherubs and lyres, its windows glowing with amber light. Inside, the air smelled of varnish and aged wood, and the walls were lined with violins, violas, and cellos, each gleaming like a jewel. The guildmaster, Herr Franz Koller, greeted them with a bow, his silver hair glinting under the chandelier. He was a wiry man with sharp eyes that seemed to dissect every word. "Mr. Sheridan." "Dr. Wilson," Koller said, using their aliases. A pleasure to host such discerning gentlemen. You seek a Stainer violin, yes? A rare treasure. Holmes, as Sheridan leaned forward, his voice smooth. Indeed, Herr Collar. I've heard whispers of a particular set of strings, crafted with an alloy that gives them an unearthly quality. I'm prepared to pay handsomely for their provenance. Collar's smile faltered just for a moment. Strings, you say? We deal in instruments, not their components. But perhaps I can show you our finest violins. Watson caught the shift in Collar's demeanor and glanced at Holmes, who pressed on undeterred. Forgive my specificity, but I've heard of a craftsman here, perhaps a descendant of Stainer's school, who works with such materials. A guild secret, I presume? The room seemed to grow colder. Collar's fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on his desk. You are well informed, Mr. Sheridan, but such matters are not discussed openly. Let us speak of violins instead. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Of course. Perhaps a tour of your workshops? I'm keen to see the artistry behind your craft. Collar hesitated, then nodded. Very well. Follow me. The workshops were a labyrinth of narrow corridors and cluttered rooms, each filled with the tools of the luthier's trade, chisels, planes, and coils of spruce shavings. The air hummed with the faint vibrations of tuning forks and the occasional pluck of a string. Watson, trailing behind, felt a growing unease. The workers, mostly silent, stooped figures, watched them with guarded eyes, their hands pausing over their tasks. Holmes, however, moved with purpose, his gaze darting to every detail. A locked cabinet in one corner, a stack of ledgers on a dusty shelf, a faint chemical smell that didn't belong among wood and varnish. As Collar droned on about spruce resonance, Holmes slipped a small tool from his pocket, a lockpick disguised as a pen, and subtly tested the cabinet's lock. It clicked softly, unnoticed by their guide. Remarkable craftsmanship, Holmes sighed, distracting Collar. You keep records of your suppliers? I'm curious about the sourcing of your materials. Collar's voice tightened. Our records are private, Mr. Sheridan. Trade secrets, you understand. Of course, Holmes replied, his tone disarming. But perhaps a glimpse at your archives? For a collector, history is as valuable as the instrument itself. Collar's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, a young apprentice burst into the room, breathless. Herr Collar, there's an issue in the varnish room. A spill urgent. Collar cursed it under his breath and excused himself, leaving Holmes and Watson alone. Holmes wasted no time, moving to the cabinet and easing it open. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed, but meticulously kept. He flipped through it, his fingers tracing lines of cryptic shorthand. Watson, keep watch, he whispered, his voice taut with excitement. This is it, the record of the alloy's transactions. Watson stood by the door, his hand on his revolver, straining to hear footsteps over the distant hum of the workshops. Holmes scanned the ledger, his mind racing to decipher the code. Names, dates, and quantities emerged. Shipments of a rare alloy to Prague, London, and New York, all linked to a single name, Voss. Lady Katerina Voss, Holmes murmured. A noble woman in Prague. She's funding this operation. Before Watson could respond, a shadow moved in the corridor. He hissed a warning, but it was too late. 3 men, their faces half hidden by scarves, burst into the room, wielding knives that glinted in the lamplight. Holmes slammed the ledger shut and tucked it under his coat, his expression calm but deadly. Gentlemen, he said, stepping forward, I suggest you reconsider. My associate is an excellent shot. Watson drew his revolver, his heart pounding. The men hesitated, their eyes flicking to the weapon. Then, as if on cue, they lunged. Holmes moved like a specter, dodging a blade and striking one attacker's wrist with his cane, sending the knife clattering. Watson fired a warning shot into the ceiling, the sound echoing like thunder. The attackers froze, then bolted, disappearing into the maze of corridors. "After them!" Holmes barked, already running. The chase spilled onto the cobblestone streets of Alsergrund, the night air sharp with the scent of rain. The attackers split up, weaving through alleys lined with shuttered shops and gaslit lanterns. Holmes pursued. The leader, a wiry man with a limp, while Watson tackled a second, pinning him against a wall. The third vanished into the shadows. Holmes's quarry ducked into a narrow passage, but Holmes was relentless, his long strides closing the gap. He tackled the man, sending them both crashing into a pile of crates. The ledger slipped from Holmes's coat, and the man lunged for it, but Holmes was faster, pinning his arm and retrieving the book. "Who sent you?" Holmes demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Vos? The guild?" The man spat, his accent thick. "You'll get nothing from me, Englishman." Holmes's eyes narrowed. He noticed a tattoo on the man's wrist, a lyre, entwined with thorns. "A guild mark," he muttered. "You're no common thug." Before the man could respond, a whistle pierced the night police, drawn by the gunshot. The man twisted free and fled, leaving Holmes clutching the ledger. Watson joined him, breathless, his captive having escaped in the chaos. "They're protecting something big," Watson panted. "What's in that ledger?" Holmes flipped it open, his eyes scanning the pages. "Names, Watson. Patrons, craftsmen, and a trail leading to Prague. Lady Voss is our next move." They slipped away as the police whistles grew louder, retreating to their hotel under the cover of darkness. In their room, Holmes spread the ledger on a table, its pages illuminated by a flickering oil lamp. The shorthand was complex, but Holmes's mind was a machine, unraveling it line by line. "Voss is no mere patron," he said, his voice low. "She's orchestrating the distribution of these strings, using her wealth and influence. But why? Power? Revenge? Or something stranger?" Watson sank into a chair, rubbing his bruised knuckles. "This feels bigger than a cursed violin, Holmes. A secret society, alchemical alloys, it's madness." "Madness," Holmes replied, a spark in his eyes, "is often the mask of genius. We leave for Prague at dawn." As the city slept, Holmes sat by the window, the ledger open before him, his mind already racing toward the next clue. Outside, Vienna's streets whispered with secrets, and the faint strains of a violin drifted on the wind, as if the cursed strings themselves were calling him forward. Chapter 5. The Noble's Gambit. The train to Prague rattled through the Bohemian countryside, its iron wheels screeching against the tracks like a violin bow drawn too tightly. Sherlock Holmes sat by the window, his sharp eyes scanning the rolling hills, though his mind was elsewhere, piecing together the threads of the cursed violin strings. Dr. John Watson, seated opposite, scribbled notes in his journal, his pen scratching in rhythm with the train's clatter. The air was thick with the scent of coal smoke and anticipation. "Holmes," Watson said, glancing up, "you've been silent since Vienna. What's brewing in that head of yours?" Holmes's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "The ledger. From Vienna, Watson. It's a map of intent, not just names. Lady Katerina Voss is no mere patron of the arts. She's a fulcrum, balancing power and secrecy. Her name appeared too often in that ciphered text to be coincidence." Watson frowned, closing his journal. "You think she's the architect of this cursed nonsense?" "Architect? Perhaps, or a guardian of something older." Holmes leaned forward, his voice low. "The string's alloy isn't just a curiosity, it's a relic of intent, crafted with purpose. Voss knows more than she admit, and will need to be sharp to extract it." The train lurched into Prague's central station under a sky bruised with twilight. The city sprawled before them, its spires piercing the dusk like the notes of a somber melody. Holmes and Watson disembarked, their coats billowing in the crisp autumn wind, and made their way to the old town where Lady Voss's residence awaited. A Baroque mansion nestled among cobbled streets, its windows glowing like eyes watching their approach. The mansion's iron gates creaked open, admitting them into a courtyard lined with statues of muses, their marble faces frozen in mid-song. A butler, gaunt and pale as a spectre, greeted them with a bow that seemed more mechanical than courteous. "Lady Voss is expecting you," he intoned, his voice echoing faintly in the stone courtyard. "Follow me." Inside the mansion was a labyrinth of opulence. Chandeliers dripped crystal like frozen tears, and portraits of stern-faced nobles lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow the visitors. The butler led them to a drawing room where Lady Katerina Voss awaited, seated in a high-backed chair upholstered in crimson velvet. She was a woman of striking presence, tall, with raven hair coiled elegantly atop her head, and eyes that gleamed with the sharpness of a blade. Her gown, a deep emerald, shimmered in the firelight, and a single pearl pendant rested at her throat, catching the glow like a captured star. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice smooth as polished glass with a faint accent that hinted at years spent across Europe. "I trust your journey was pleasant?" "Pleasant enough," Holmes replied, his tone clipped. He stood rather than sat, his hands clasped behind his back, studying her as if she were a cipher to be decoded. "We're here about the violin strings, Lady Voss, the ones tied to Miss Eleanor Grayson's collapse. I believe you know their origin." Her smile was a delicate thing, like porcelain on the verge of cracking. "You waste no time, Mr. Holmes. I am a patron of music, nothing more. Strings, cursed or otherwise, are hardly my domain." Watson, seated now, leaned forward. "Yet your name appears in a ledger connected to their maker. A Viennese craftsman, secretive, tied to a guild with peculiar interests." Lady Voss's eyes flickered, a momentary lapse in her composure. "Ledgers can be forged, Dr. Watson, and names misused. I fund artists, not alchemists." Holmes stepped closer, his shadow falling across her. "Then explain the alloy." "A rare blend, conductive in ways that defy natural acoustics. It's no ordinary material, and your patronage has funded its distribution." "Why?" Her fingers tightened around the armrests, the only sign of tension. "You presume much, Mr. Holmes. I support beauty, not curses. If these strings are as you say, perhaps you should seek their source elsewhere." The air grew heavy, the fire crackling in the silence. Holmes's gaze didn't waver. "We will dine with you tonight, Lady Voss. I suspect the truth will surface over wine and conversation." She inclined her head, her smile returning, though it carried a chill. "Very well. Dinner is at 8. I trust you'll find my hospitality illuminating." The dining hall was a cathedral of excess, its long table laden with silver and crystal, candles casting shadows that danced like specters across the walls. Holmes and Watson sat across from Lady Voss, joined by a handful of her associates minor. Nobility and artists, their faces a gallery of guarded expressions. The meal began with a consomme, its steam curling upward like a ghostly melody. Holmes, ever observant, noted the servants' movements too precise, too synchronized, as if rehearsed for more than mere service. Watson, less attuned to such subtleties, engaged in polite conversation with a painter to his left, a nervous man who spoke of Prague's artistic renaissance, but avoided mention of music. As the main course, roast pheasant with a sauce that smelled faintly of anise, was served, Holmes leaned toward Lady Voss. "Tell me, do you play an instrument yourself?" "The violin, perhaps." She sliced into her pheasant with deliberate grace. "I prefer to listen, Mr. Holmes. The violin is a demanding mistress, and I lack the patience for its strings." "Yet you fund those who wield them," Holmes pressed. "Miss Grayson, for instance. Her strings came from an anonymous donor. Curious, isn't it, that they bear an inscription linked to your family crest?" The table fell silent, forks pausing mid-air. Lady Voss's eyes narrowed, but her voice remained steady. "You've done your research." "My family's crest is old, Mr. Holmes, and often borrowed by those seeking prestige. I assure you, I sent no strings. Watson, sensing the tension, shifted in his seat, his hand brushing against his wine glass. He lifted it to drink, but Holmes's hand shot out, seizing his wrist. Don't. The room froze. Watson's eyes widened as Holmes sniffed the glass, his expression darkening. Laudanum, subtle, but unmistakable. Someone wishes you silent, Watson. Lady Voss rose, her face a mask of indignation. This is outrageous. My staff would never. Yet they have, Holmes interrupted, standing. He turned to the nearest servant, a young man whose hands trembled as he held a decanter. You, step forward. The servant hesitated, then bolted for the door. Holmes was faster, intercepting him with a swift sidestep, pinning him against the wall. The decanter shattered, spilling wine that reeked of something bitter and chemical. Speak, Holmes commanded. Who ordered the poison? The servant's eyes darted to Lady Voss, then away. I was told to serve it. A man cloaked, paid me. I didn't see his face. Holmes released him, turning to the table. Lady Voss, your household is compromised. Either you're complicit, or you're a target. Which is it? Her composure cracked, her hands clenching into fists. I am no one's pawn, Mr. Holmes. But you're right, someone seeks to undermine me. Follow me. She led them to a private study, its walls lined with leather-bound tomes, and a single portrait of a stern man in 17th century attire, his hand resting on a violin. The room smelled of old paper and secrets. Lady Voss locked the door behind them, her movements brisk. You want the truth? She said, her voice low. Then listen. The strings are older than you know, tied to an alchemist named Dietrich Voss, my ancestor. He sought to harness sound as a weapon, to bend minds. His experiments were buried, but someone has unearthed them. I've been trying to stop it. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Then why the secrecy? Why fund musicians like Grayson? To trace the strings, she snapped. I gave her those strings to draw out the culprits. I didn't expect her collapse. Someone else is pulling the threads, Mr. Holmes, and they're closer to you than you think. Watson, still shaken from the poison attempt, spoke up. You could have warned us. Why the charade? Her gaze softened, just for a moment. Because trust is a luxury I cannot afford. But this, she pulled a folded letter from a hidden drawer, its wax seal broken. This came yesterday. It's coded, but it mentions a performance in London. One that will change everything. Holmes took the letter, his fingers tracing the script. A cipher. Visionaire, if I'm not mistaken. We'll need the key. Lady Voss hesitated, then whispered, Dietrich. The key is his name. Holmes unfolded the letter, his mind already racing. The words were a jumble, but the intent was clear. A grand event, a gathering of power, and the cursed strings at its heart. Watson, we're leaving at dawn. London awaits. As they turned to leave, a crash echoed from the hall. Lady Voss gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Holmes flung open the door to find the butler slumped against the wall, a dagger in his chest, his eyes wide with shock. A shadow darted down the corridor, too swift to pursue. She's gone, Holmes said, his voice grim. Lady Voss, you're coming with us. Your enemies are bolder than I anticipated. The journey back to London was fraught with tension. Lady Voss, now a reluctant ally, sat silently in their train compartment, her emerald gown traded for a plain cloak. Watson kept a wary eye on her, his trust shaken by the poison attempt. Holmes, meanwhile, pored over the coded letter, his pencil scratching out possibilities. Dietrich, he muttered. The alchemist's name unlocks the cipher, but the message points to a man named Harrow. Lord Reginald Harrow, a music patron, with a penchant for control. He's hosting a performance in 3 days. That's our target, Watson frowned. And the strings? If they're as dangerous as she says, why not destroy them? Lady Voss spoke at last, her voice barely above a whisper. Because they can't be destroyed, not easily. Dietrich's alloy resists fire, acid, even time. The only way to stop them is to disrupt their resonance, to break their power at the source. Holmes nodded, his eyes distant. Then we'll need to be at that performance, Watson. Disguised, prepared, and one step ahead. As the train sped toward London, the coded letter lay open on the table, its words a haunting prelude to the danger awaiting them. The cursed strings hummed in Holmes's mind, their melody a puzzle yet to be solved, and the stakes higher than ever. Chapter 6. The cipher's clue. The fog clung to London's cobblestones like a conspirator's cloak, muffling the clatter of hooves and the distant toll of Big Ben. Sherlock Holmes, his lean frame shrouded in a black greatcoat, moved with purposeful strides through the gaslit streets of Mayfair, Dr. John Watson at his side. The air was thick with the scent of coal smoke and damp earth, a fitting prelude to the mystery that had consumed Holmes's mind since their return from Prague. In his gloved hand, he clutched the coded letter left by Lady Katerina Voss, its cryptic symbols burning in his memory like a half-solved puzzle. Holmes, Watson ventured, his voice low. You've been silent since we boarded the train from Dover. What's in that letter that's got you so preoccupied? Holmes's gray eyes flicked toward his friend, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Patience, Watson. The letter is a map, but one drawn in shadows. It speaks of a performance, one that promises to wield the cursed strings' power once more. We are not merely chasing a villain, but a scheme that threatens to ensnare London's elite. Watson adjusted his scarf against the chill. And this performance is at Lord Harrow's estate. The man's a pillar of society, patron of the Royal Philharmonic, no less. Surely he's not tangled in this. Pillars, Watson, are often the first to conceal cracks, Holmes replied, his tone sharp with conviction. Lord Reginald Harrow's name appeared in the cipher, and I suspect he is either a puppet or a puppeteer in this affair. Tonight we shall find out which. They turned onto Grosvenor Square, where Harrow's sprawling estate loomed, its Palladian facade glowing under the flicker of torchlight. Carriages lined the street, their horses snorting clouds of steam as liveried footmen ushered guests toward the grand entrance. The air buzzed with anticipation, for Harrow's private concerts were legendary, attended by dukes, diplomats, and the cultural elite. Tonight, however, Holmes suspected the music would play a darker tune. We're hardly dressed for a gala, Watson muttered, glancing at his plain tweed suit and Holmes's unassuming attire. How do you propose we get in? Holmes's smile widened, a glint of mischief in his eyes. We shan't enter as gentlemen, Watson, but as musicians. Observe. From his satchel, he produced two neatly pressed uniforms, black tailcoats, with the discreet emblem of the Royal Philharmonic's orchestra, borrowed with some persuasion from a cooperative tailor in Covent Garden. Watson raised an eyebrow. You've thought of everything, haven't you? Not everything, Holmes admitted, adjusting his collar. The strings' hypnotic power remains an enigma. We must be vigilant, lest we fall under their spell ourselves. They slipped through a side gate, blending seamlessly with a group of musicians hauling instrument cases toward the servants' entrance. The head butler, a doorman with a monocle, barely glanced at their forged credentials before waving them through. Inside, the estate was a labyrinth of marble corridors and gilded chandeliers, the walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. The faint hum of conversation and clinking glasses drifted from the ballroom, where the evening's performance was set to begin. Holmes led Watson to a cramped preparation room, where musicians tuned their instruments in a flurry of rosin and nervous chatter. A cellist, her face pale, muttered about the guest soloist whose arrival had caused a stir. Holmes's ears pricked at the mention. A guest soloist, you say? He inquired, adopting the casual tone of a fellow performer. Who might that be? The cellist glanced around, her voice dropping to a whisper. No one's seen her face. She arrived cloaked, with a violin case clutched like it was her soul. They say her strings. They sing on their own. Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson. The cursed strings were here, as the cipher had promised. He handed Watson a violin bow, its weight a reassuring anchor. "Stay close, Watson. Our quarry is near." They joined the orchestra, slipping into the back row of the string section. The ballroom was a spectacle of opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across velvet drapes, and guests in silks and satins sipped champagne, their laughter tinged with nervous excitement. Lord Harrow, a tall man with silver hair and a hawkish nose, stood at the center, greeting dignitaries with practiced charm. His eyes, however, darted toward a curtained alcove at the stage's edge, where a figure stood in shadow. The orchestra began a prelude, a lilting Mozart piece that filled the room with warmth. Holmes's fingers moved mechanically over his violin, his attention fixed on the alcove. Then, the curtains parted, and the guest soloist emerged. She was a woman of striking presence, her face obscured by a lace veil, her black gown shimmering like obsidian. In her hands was a violin, its strings glinting with an unnatural sheen under the chandelier's glow. The audience fell silent as she raised her bow. The first note was a low, resonant hum, unlike any violin Holmes had ever heard. It vibrated through the room, a sound both beautiful and unsettling, like a siren's call laced with menace. Watson shifted uneasily beside him, his hand inching toward the revolver concealed in his coat. "Holmes," he whispered, "that sound, it's doing something to me. My head feels heavy." Holmes's jaw tightened. "Focus on my voice, Watson. The string's alloy amplifies vibrations to manipulate the mind. Count your breaths and do not let the music take hold." The soloist's performance grew in intensity, her bow dancing across the strings with preternatural speed. The audience swayed, their eyes glassy, as if entranced. Holmes noticed Lord Harrow's expression shift from smug satisfaction to unease, as though he sensed the music's power exceeding his control. The cipher had mentioned a ritual of sound, and Holmes now understood its meaning. The strings were a weapon, designed to bend wills. He leaned toward Watson. "We must act before the music reaches its crescendo. Follow my lead." Slipping from their seats, they moved along the ballroom's edge, unnoticed in the spellbound haze. Holmes's mind raced, piecing together the cipher's clues. The performance was a test, a demonstration of the string's power for a select audience, likely buyers or conspirators. The stolen invitation in his pocket, taken from Lady Vose's belongings, was their key to the next phase. They reached a side door leading to the estate's private wing. Holmes picked the lock with a practiced flick of his tools, and they entered a dimly lit corridor lined with oak panels. The music's hum followed them, muffled but persistent, like a heartbeat echoing through the walls. At the corridor's end was a heavy door, its lock engraved with a symbol matching the inscription on the violin strings. "Holmes," Watson said, his voice strained. "That symbol, it's the same as the one on the strings in Prague." "Indeed," Holmes replied, his fingers tracing the engraving. "A sigil of the alchemist who crafted the alloy. This door leads to answers." He produced a skeleton key, but before he could insert it, footsteps echoed behind them. Two burly men in dark suits appeared, their faces grim. "You're not supposed to be here," one growled, drawing a cudgel. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Watson now." Watson lunged, his military training evident as he disarmed the first man with a swift jab to the wrist. Holmes dodged the second man's swing, delivering a precise strike to his knee that sent him crumpling. The scuffle was brief but loud, and Holmes knew they had little time before others arrived. The door yielded to his key, revealing a spiral staircase descending into darkness. The music's pull grew stronger, a siren's lure tugging at their resolve. Holmes lit a match, its flicker illuminating stone walls etched with arcane symbols. "We're entering the heart of their scheme," he said, stay sharp. At the staircase's base was a chamber, its air thick with the scent of wax and incense. A table held a collection of violin strings, each coiled like a serpent, glinting with the same unnatural sheen. Papers strewn across the table bore chemical formulas and musical notations, a marriage of science and sorcery. Holmes's gaze locked on a single sheet, a guest list for a midnight conclave, marked for the following night beneath London streets. "Watson," Holmes said, pocketing the list, "this is no mere concert, it's a prelude to a gathering where the strings' power will be unleashed on a grand scale." Before Watson could respond, a shadow moved in the chamber's corner. A figure in a hooded cloak stepped forward, clutching a violin. The strings hummed faintly, as if alive. "You're too late, Mr. Holmes," the figure said, their voice a low rasp. "The music has already begun." Holmes's hand shot to his pocket, retrieving a tuning fork. He struck it against the table, its pure note clashing with the strings. The figure flinched, the violin's resonance faltering. "Your strings rely on harmonic precision," Holmes said coolly. "Disrupt the frequency, and their power crumbles." The figure lunged, but Watson was faster, tackling them to the ground. The cloak fell away, revealing a young man with wild eyes, his face marked by a scar. "You can't stop it," he hissed. "The conclave will rise." Holmes bound the man's wrists with a cord from his satchel. "We shall see about that," he said, retrieving the stolen invitation from his pocket. It was a card, embossed with the same alchemical sigil, directing them to an address in Whitechapel, a derelict warehouse known for illicit gatherings. As they emerged from the chamber, the ballroom's music reached a fevered pitch, then abruptly stopped. Shouts and footsteps echoed above, signaling chaos. Holmes and Watson slipped back into the crowd, now a sea of dazed guests shaking off the strings' spell. Lord Harrow stood at the stage's edge, his face pale as he barked orders to his staff. Holmes leaned close to Watson. "Harrow is a pawn, unaware of the full scope. The true orchestrator awaits us at the conclave. We must prepare." They exited the estate under the guise of fleeing musicians, the invitation burning in Holmes's pocket like a brand. The fog swallowed them as they vanished into the night, the promise of tomorrow's confrontation hanging heavy. The cursed strings melody lingered in their minds, a haunting reminder that the game was far from over. The next day, Holmes sat at 221B Baker Street. The invitation spread before him on the cluttered table. Mrs. Hudson had brought tea, her usual chatter silenced by Holmes's intense focus. Watson paced, his nerves frayed from the previous night's ordeal. "The address is a warehouse in Whitechapel," Holmes said, tapping the card. "A place known for smuggling and secret societies. The conclave is no mere meeting, it's a ritual designed to amplify the strings' power across a larger audience." Watson frowned. "But who's behind it? Lady Vos? Harrow?" Holmes shook his head. "Vos was a courier, Harrow a dupe. The true mastermind hides behind the sigil. The young man we captured last night, he's a zealot, not a leader." His words suggested a figure of greater ambition. He turned to the ciphered letter, its symbols now decoded in his notebook. The text spoke of a conductor of minds, a title that chilled Watson's blood. "Holmes, if they can control minds, with music, what's to stop them from targeting anyone? Parliament? The Crown?" "Precisely why we must act tonight," Holmes said, rising. "We'll need disguises, something less conspicuous than musicians this time. And Watson, bring your revolver. I suspect we'll face more than music." The Whitechapel warehouse loomed like a decayed tooth against the moonless sky. Its windows were boarded, but faint light seeped through the cracks, accompanied by the low hum of the cursed strings. Holmes and Watson, now dressed as dockworkers, approached cautiously, their boots silent on the damp cobbles. Holmes pressed his ear to a rusted door. "They're already gathered," he whispered. "The music is subdued for now." We must find the leader before the ritual begins. They slipped inside, navigating a maze of crates and shadows. The warehouse's interior was a cavernous space, its ceiling lost in darkness. At its center was a makeshift stage where a dozen figures in hooded cloaks stood in a circle, their hands raised as a lone violinist played. The string's hum was hypnotic, weaving a spell that made Watson's vision blur. Holmes gripped his arm. "Count your breaths, Watson. Resist." They crept closer, hiding behind a stack of barrels. The violinist was the same veiled woman from Harrow's estate, her movements mechanical, as if possessed. At the circle's center stood a masked figure, their voice commanding as they chanted in a tongue Holmes recognized as a bastardized Latin, laced with alchemical terms. "The conductor of minds," Holmes murmured. "Their leader." He scanned the room, noting a series of mirrors positioned around the stage, reflecting the string's vibrations in a complex pattern. "Clever," he said. "The mirrors amplify the sound's effect, creating a resonance chamber. If we disrupt the alignment, the ritual fails." Watson nodded, his hand on his revolver. "What's the plan?" Holmes produced a small glass vial from his coat, a concoction from Dr. Finch's laboratory. "This is a sonic disruptor, a compound that vibrates at a frequency to counter the strings. Throw it at the mirrors when I give the signal." They split up, Holmes circling to the stage's left, Watson to the right. The chanting grew louder, the strings hum now a palpable force, pressing against their skulls. Holmes climbed a rickety ladder to a catwalk above, his movements silent despite the warehouse's groans. From his vantage point, he saw the masked leader raise a baton, signaling the violinist to intensify her playing. The audience cloaked figures whose faces bore the marks of wealth and power swayed, their eyes vacant. Holmes recognized a cabinet minister among them, his presence confirming the conspiracy's reach. Time was running out. He signaled Watson with a flash of his pocket mirror. Watson hurled the vial, its contents shattering across the nearest mirror. A high-pitched wail erupted, the strings hummed, fracturing into discord. The cloaked figures clutched their heads, the trance broken. The violinist staggered, her bow falling silent. The masked leader roared, "Seize them!" Holmes leapt from the catwalk, landing on the stage with a thud. He struck his tuning fork again, its note cutting through the chaos. Watson fired a warning shot into the ceiling, scattering the cloaked figures. The leader lunged for the violin, but Holmes was faster, kicking it from their grasp. The strings snapped, their hum dying in a final mournful wail dot in the melee. The leader slipped through a hidden panel, vanishing into the warehouse's depths. Holmes pursued, but not before grabbing a tattered notebook from the stage, a fragment of their plans, scrawled with dates and names of targets across Europe and America. Watson joined him, breathless. "They're gone, Holmes. But we've stopped the ritual. For now," Holmes said, his voice grim. "The leader escapes, but this notebook points to a ship bound for New York. The game continues, Watson." They fled the warehouse as shouts of approaching constables echoed outside. The notebook, clutched in Holmes's hand, was a beacon in the fog, a clue to the next chapter of their pursuit, where the cursed strings' legacy would lead them across the Atlantic, into a storm of ambition and revenge. Chapter 7. The Midnight Conclave. The fog clung to London's cobblestones like a conspirator, muffling the clatter of hooves as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson's hansom cab rattled toward the city's underbelly. The stolen invitation, a crisp rectangle of vellum embossed with a cryptic treble clef, lay tucked inside Holmes's greatcoat. Its promise of a secret meeting pulsed with the weight of the unknown, a siren call to the detective's relentless curiosity. Beside him, Watson adjusted his scarf, his breath visible in the chill night air, his revolver a comforting weight in his pocket. "Holmes," Watson murmured, his voice low to avoid the driver's ears. "This feels like walking into a lion's den with a stick of dynamite. Are you certain this invitation isn't a trap?" Holmes's lips curved into a faint, predatory smile. "My dear Watson, traps are merely puzzles with sharper edges. The invitation's ink matches the ciphered letter from Lady Voss, and its watermark, a subtle lyre, bears the same craftsmanship as the ledger from Vienna. This is no mere lure. It's a door to the heart of their scheme." The cab halted near a derelict alley in Whitechapel, where gaslights flickered like wary sentinels. Holmes paid the driver with a nod, and the two men stepped into the shadows. The invitation had specified a nondescript door beneath an abandoned tannery, marked only by a chipped cornerstone etched with a musical staff. Holmes's keen eyes spotted it at once, half hidden by a pile of rotting crates. He knelt, running a gloved finger over the carving, his mind already dissecting its implications. A musical staff with no notes, he mused. A cipher, perhaps, or a signal to those who know its meaning. "Stay sharp, Watson. We're not alone." Watson's hand rested on his revolver as Holmes rapped on the door in a precise rhythm, 3 short knocks. A pause, then 2 long. Door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. A faint hum, like the drone of a distant cello, vibrated through the stone walls, setting Watson's nerves on edge. Holmes, undeterred, led the way, his silhouette a lean specter against the dim glow of a lantern at the stair's base. The staircase spiraled into a cavernous chamber, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. The air was thick with the scent of wax and old stone, and the hum grew louder, a hypnotic pulse that seemed to tug at the edges of Watson's thoughts. Torches flickered along the walls, casting jagged shadows over a gathering of figures cloaked in dark robes, their faces obscured by hoods. At the chamber's center stood a low platform, where a single violin rested on a velvet cushion, its strings glinting with an unnatural sheen. The cursed strings, Watson realized, their resonance filling the space like a living thing. Holmes, disguised in a borrowed musician's coat and a false beard, blended seamlessly into the crowd. Watson followed suit, his own disguise a tattered cloak and a slouched hat, making him feel like an actor in a grim pantomime. They moved to the edge of the gathering, where whispers buzzed like flies. The attendees, perhaps 24, were an odd mix: a portly man with a banker's gold watch, a woman with diamonds glinting at her throat, and others whose accents hinted at foreign origins, French, Russian, perhaps Italian. This was no mere cult. It was a cabal of influence, drawn together by the string's promise. A figure stepped onto the platform, cloaked in black, a silver mask shaped like a crescent moon concealing their face. The crowd fell silent, the hum of the strings intensifying. As the figure raised a hand, their voice, low and resonant, carried an authority that made Watson's skin prickle. "Brothers and sisters of the lyre," the masked leader intoned, "tonight we stand on the precipice of dominion. The strings you see before you are no mere instrument, they are a key to the minds of men. With their song, we will bend the will of nations, reshape the world in our image." Watson glanced at Holmes, whose eyes gleamed with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. The detective's fingers twitched, itching to unravel the mechanism behind the string's power. Watson leaned closer, whispering, "What's their game, Holmes? Hypnotism? Some chemical trick?" Holmes's gaze remained fixed on the platform. "More than hypnotism, Watson. The string's alloy, as Finch described, amplifies sound to manipulate neural patterns. It's a science masquerading as sorcery, and they've weaponized it. Observe the crowd. They're already swaying, entranced by the resonance alone." The leader lifted the violin, drawing a bow across its strings. A single note, pure and piercing, filled the chamber, and Watson felt a jolt as if the sound had reached into his chest and squeezed. The crowd gasped, some clutching their heads, others staring blankly as if lost in a dream. Holmes gripped Watson's arm, his voice a sharp whisper. "Focus, Watson. Anchor yourself to my voice. The strings. Exploit suggestibility, resist it." Watson nodded, clenching his jaw. But the note lingered, a siren's call tugging at his resolve. Holmes, seemingly unaffected, scanned the chamber, his mind racing. The platform was rigged with wires, barely visible, leading to a hidden mechanism. Beneath the floor, a control system, perhaps amplifying the string's effect. He needed to act, but not yet. The leader's next words held the key. Our first demonstration, the leader continued, proved the string's power in Vienna, bending a guild to our will. Tonight, we prepare for London's elite, a performance that will chain their minds to ours. Tomorrow, the world. The crowd murmured approval, their eyes glassy. Watson's heart pounded. He'd seen men drugged by opium with less vacancy in their stares. Holmes, however, was already moving, slipping through the crowd like a shadow. Watson followed, his hand hovering near his revolver, as they edged toward the platform's underside. The wires converged at a brass panel, its surface etched with alchemical symbols. Holmes knelt, producing a small tool from his pocket, a jeweler's pick, gleaming in the torchlight. "Cover me, Watson," he whispered, prying open the panel. Inside was a tangle of gears and crystal resonators, vibrating in sync with the string's hum. "Ingenious," Holmes muttered. "The strings are merely the catalyst. This device amplifies their effect, broadcasting it to the crowd. If I can disrupt the resonance." A robed figure loomed behind them, a blade glinting in their hand. Watson reacted instinctively, tackling the assailant to the ground. The scuffle was brief but loud, drawing eyes from the crowd. Holmes worked faster, his fingers dancing over the mechanism as he recalibrated the resonators with surgical precision. The hum faltered, replaced by a discordant screech that shattered the trance. The crowd blinked, confused, as the leader's voice faltered mid-sentence. "Seize them!" The leader bellowed, pointing at Holmes and Watson. Robed figures surged forward, but Holmes was ready. He yanked a wire free, sending a shower of sparks across the platform. The violin strings snapped with a sound like breaking glass, and the crowd screamed, clutching their ears as the hypnotic spell collapsed. Chaos erupted. Robes swirled as attendees fled or fought, their unity shattered. Watson fired a warning shot into the ceiling, the crack of his revolver cutting through. The din. Holmes grabbed the broken violin, stuffing it into his coat, and pulled Watson toward a side passage. The leader's silver mask flashed in the torchlight as they shouted orders, but the crowd's panic drowned them out. The passage led to a maze of tunnels, damp and echoing with the distant clamor of pursuit. Holmes moved with the certainty of a bloodhound, his mind mapping the labyrinth from memory. "The sewers," he said, his voice steady despite their flight. "They connect to the Thames. We'll lose them there." Watson panted, his heart racing. "Holmes, that was too close. What was that machine?" "A sonic amplifier," Holmes replied, ducking under a low arch. "The string's alloy resonates at a frequency that induces suggestibility, but the device beneath the platform magnified it tenfold. I altered its calibration to produce dissonance, breaking the effect. But the leader, they're the key." "Did you notice their voice?" Watson frowned, dodging a puddle. "Deep, commanding. What of it?" "Trained," Holmes said. "A performer's diction, modulated to conceal gender or origin. They're no mere fanatic, they're a strategist, and they've planned this for years." The tunnel opened to a grate overlooking the Thames, its waters black and sluggish. Under the moon. Holmes pried it open, and they slipped onto a narrow ledge, the city's pulse faint above them. The violin, now silent, weighed heavily in Holmes's coat. He examined it, his fingers tracing the broken strings. "These fragments," he said, "contain traces of the alloy. Enough for Finch to analyze further. But the leader's escape troubles me." Watson caught his breath, leaning against the wall. "They mentioned a ship to America. Are we following?" Holmes's eyes gleamed, reflecting the river's sheen. "Inevitably, Watson. The game is afoot, and it stretches across the Atlantic." This society seeks power, not mere wealth. We've disrupted their ritual, but their ambition remains. The ship leaves at dawn, we must be on it. As they climbed toward the street, the fog swallowed them once more, but Holmes's mind was alight with the thrill of the chase. The cursed strings, though broken, whispered of a larger design, and he would not rest until its final note was silenced. Chapter 8. The Transatlantic Pursuit. The USS Oceanic cut through the Atlantic's restless waves, her iron hull groaning under the weight of a late autumn storm. Sherlock Holmes leaned against the railing of the promenade deck, his greatcoat flapping. In the wind, eyes fixed on the horizon where gray sky met churning sea. Beside him, Dr. John Watson clutched his hat, squinting against the spray. The ship was bound for New York, carrying them in pursuit of the masked leader of a secret society, intent on wielding the cursed violin strings' hypnotic power. The trail had led them here, to this floating microcosm of humanity, where danger lurked among the passengers and crew. Holmes's mind churned faster than the ship's propellers. The ledger from Vienna had pointed to this voyage, and the cryptic. Words of Lady Katerina Voss's coded letter echoed in his memory. The maestro sails west, where the new world will sing his tune. The masked leader, whose identity remained elusive, was aboard, and Holmes was certain they were plotting their next move. The cursed strings, with their eerie alloy capable of bending minds through music, were too dangerous to be left in such hands. Holmes, Watson said, breaking the silence. You've been staring at that horizon as if it'll confess its secrets. Care to share what's brewing in that head of yours? Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. The sea is a vast chessboard, Watson. Our opponent is here, hidden among knights and pawns. The question is not if they'll move, but when and how. Watson sighed, rubbing his hands for warmth. I'd settle for a hot cup of tea and a moment's peace. This blasted wind is worse than a Baskerville moor. Peace is a luxury we cannot afford, Holmes replied, turning from the railing. Come, let us survey the board. The SS Oceanic was a marvel of modern engineering, its grand saloon adorned with crystal chandeliers and mahogany paneling, its corridors bustling with passengers from every walk of life, wealthy industrialists, hopeful immigrants, and sharp-eyed crew members. Holmes and Watson moved to the first-class dining saloon, where the clink of silverware and murmur of conversation masked their purpose. Holmes's eyes darted from face to face, cataloging details, a nervous tick in a businessman's jaw, a governess's overly tight grip on her fork, a steward's lingering glance at a locked cabinet. They settled at a table near the center, where Holmes could observe the room's pulse. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music a stark contrast to the cursed strings' hypnotic drone. Watson ordered a modest supper, while Holmes, as usual, barely touched his plate, his attention elsewhere. Notice the second violinist, Holmes murmured, nodding subtly toward the quartet. His bow technique is impeccable, yet he hesitates on the high notes, as if afraid of the sound. Curious, don't you think? Watson squinted. He's just a musician, Holmes. Probably nervous under all these eyes. Or, Holmes countered, he's played strings that hum with more than music. Keep an eye on him. Their meal was interrupted by a commotion at the far end of the saloon. A young woman, no older than 20, burst through the doors, her dark hair disheveled and her eyes wild with panic. She wore a simple dress, out of place among the glittering gowns, and her hands clutched a tattered violin case. The steward moved to intercept her, but she darted past, her voice rising. Please, someone help, they're after me, she cried, stumbling toward the center of the room. Holmes was on his feet in an instant, his chair scraping softly. Watson followed, his hand instinctively brushing the revolver in his coat. The woman's gaze locked onto Holmes, and she rushed toward him, nearly collapsing at their table. Double quote, sir, you must help me, she gasped, her voice thick with a faint Eastern European accent. They want my violin. They say it's cursed. Holmes's. Eyes narrowed, his interest piqued. "Calm yourself, madam. Sit. Tell me everything." The woman, who introduced herself as Anna Kowalska, sank into a chair, clutching her violin case as if it were a lifeline. The other passengers whispered, their curiosity tinged with unease, but Holmes waved off the approaching steward with a sharp glance. Anna's story spilled out in halting bursts. She was a Polish immigrant, a prodigy violinist who had fled Europe after her family's music shop was destroyed. The cursed strings, she claimed, had been a gift from her late father, who had acquired them from a mysterious traveler. When she played them, audiences fell into trances, and strange men began pursuing her, demanding the strings. "They followed me onto the ship," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "They know I have them. Last night, someone tried to break into my cabin." Holmes leaned forward, his voice low. "Describe these men." "Tall, one with a scar across his cheek," Anna said. "They wore dark cloaks like shadows. They spoke of a maestro who wants the strings for a performance in New York." Watson exchanged a glance with Holmes. The description matched the society's enforcers from Vienna. Holmes's fingers tapped a silent rhythm on the table, his mind racing. "Miss Kowalska," he said, "your strings are no ordinary gutter wire. May I examine them?" Anna hesitated, her grip tightening on the case. "They're all I have left of my father." "If I lose them, you shan't," Holmes assured her. "But if they are what I suspect, they're as dangerous to you as to anyone else." Reluctantly, she opened the case, revealing a weathered violin and 4 gleaming strings coiled in a velvet compartment. Their metallic sheen caught the chandelier light, shimmering with an unnatural luster. Holmes donned a pair of gloves from his pocket and lifted one string, holding it to the light. Its surface was etched with faint, intricate symbols similar to those he'd seen in London. "Remarkable," he murmured. "Watson, note the alloy's reflective quality. It's identical to the sample we analyzed with Dr. Finch." Anna's eyes widened. "You know about these strings?" "More than I'd like," Holmes replied. "Miss Kowalska, you're in grave danger. These strings are part of a larger scheme. Stay close to us and do not play them under any circumstances." Before Anna could respond, a low rumble shook the ship, followed by a chorus of gasps from the passengers. The chandelier swayed, and the quartet's music faltered. A steward rushed into the saloon, his face pale. "Ladies and gentlemen, please." "Remain calm," he announced. "The ship has encountered a storm. Return to your cabins and secure all belongings." Holmes's eyes gleamed with suspicion. A storm, or something more deliberate? "Watson, Anna, with me." They navigated the crowded corridors, Anna clutching her violin case as passengers hurried to their cabins. The ship lurched again, and Holmes steadied Anna with a firm hand. Outside, the wind howled, and rain lashed the portholes. Holmes led them to the lower decks, where the crew's quarters and cargo holds offered fewer prying eyes out in a dimly lit passageway. Holmes paused, his ear pressed to a bulkhead. "Listen," he whispered. "The rhythm of the engines is off." "Someone's tampering with the machinery," Watson frowned. "Sabotage? To what end?" "To strand us," Holmes said grimly. "Or to create chaos, masking their true purpose." "Anna, have you noticed anyone watching you since boarding?" She nodded, her voice trembling. "A man in a gray suit. He was in the third-class lounge, staring at me during dinner." Holmes's jaw tightened. "We need to find him. Watson, take Anna to our cabin and guard her. I'll investigate the engine room." "Holmes, you can't go alone," Watson protested. "I must," Holmes said. "Speed is of the essence. Protect her, Watson. She's our key to the maestro." Reluctantly, Watson agreed, escorting Anna to their first-class cabin while Holmes slipped into the ship's underbelly. The engine room was a labyrinth of hissing, pipes and clanking pistons, the air thick with coal dust and heat. Holmes moved like a shadow, his senses attuned to every sound. Near the main boiler, he spotted a figure in a gray suit, hunched over a valve, a wrench in hand. Holmes crept closer, his footsteps masked by the engine's roar. The man was muttering to himself, his words barely audible. "The maestro will have his due. The strings will sing." With a swift motion, Holmes seized the man's wrist, twisting it until the wrench clattered to the floor. The man spun, revealing a scarred cheek and eyes wide with fury. He lunged, but Holmes sidestepped, delivering a precise jab to the man's jaw. The assailant crumpled, unconscious. Holmes searched his pockets, finding a crumpled note with a single word: Orpheus. A code name, perhaps, for the masked leader. Before he could investigate further, a second figure emerged from the shadows, a burly crewman wielding a coal shovel. Holmes ducked as the shovel swung, striking a pipe with a deafening clang. Steam hissed, obscuring the air, but Holmes used the chaos to his advantage, tripping the crewman and pinning him to the floor. "Who is Orpheus?" Holmes demanded, his voice cold as steel. The crewman spat, his accent thick. "You'll never stop him. The strings will play, and the world will listen." Holmes bound the man with a length of rope and dragged both captives to a storage closet, locking them inside. He returned to the engine room, inspecting the tampered valve. The sabotage was minor but deliberate, designed to slow the ship without sinking it. A distraction, he realized, to keep the crew occupied while the society pursued Anna. Back in the cabin, Watson stood guard, his revolver at the ready. Anna sat on the edge of a bunk, her violin case clutched to her chest. "Did you find them?" Watson asked as Holmes entered. "Two of them," Holmes said, wiping cold dust from his coat. "But they're pawns. The maestro, likely code-named Orpheus, is still at large." "Anna, tell me more about your father's acquisition of the strings." Anna's eyes glistened with tears. "He was a luthier in Warsaw. A man came to our shop 3 years ago, offering the strings as payment for a violin. He said they were forged by an alchemist, that they could make music to sway hearts. Father thought it was folklore, but when I played them, people wept, fainted, even fought to hear more. After Father died, the men came, demanding the strings. I fled to America, hoping to start anew." Holmes paced the cabin, his mind piecing together the puzzle. The strings are a tool, not the goal. This Orpheus seeks to use them for control, likely targeting influential figures in New York. "Anna, your presence on this ship is no coincidence. They knew you'd board." A violent lurch shook the cabin, and the lights flickered. A distant scream echoed through the corridor. Watson gripped his revolver. "That's no storm," Holmes nodded. "They're making their move. Anna, stay. Here, lock the door. Watson, with me." They raced to the upper deck, where chaos reigned. Passengers stumbled through the rain, clutching life preservers as crewmen shouted orders. The storm had worsened, waves crashing over the railings. Holmes spotted a group of men in dark cloaks near the lifeboats, their movements too coordinated for panic. One held a violin, its strings glinting in the lightning. "There!" Holmes shouted, pointing. "They're preparing to play the strings." He and Watson pushed through the crowd, rain soaking their clothes. The cloaked men formed a circle, the violinist raising his bow. As the first note rang out, a haunting, dissonant hum, passengers froze, their eyes glazing over. Holmes felt the sound tug at his mind, a seductive pull urging him to submit. He shook it off, his will ironclad, and tackled the violinist, snapping the strings with a swift motion. The trance broke, passengers blinking in confusion. The cloaked men scattered, but Watson grabbed one, pinning him against a lifeboat. "Where's Orpheus?" Watson growled. The man laughed, blood trickling from his lip. "You're too late. He's already in New York, waiting for the strings." Holmes's eyes blazed. "Then we'll meet him there." As the storm subsided, the SS Oceanic limped toward New York, her engine stabilized by the crew. Holmes, Watson, and Anna regrouped in the cabin, the violin case now under Holmes's watchful eye. Anna's story had revealed the strings' origins. An alchemical experiment from centuries past, designed to manipulate minds through sound. The society, led by Orpheus, sought to wield this power on a grand scale, targeting a derelict theater in New York's underbelly. Holmes stared out the porthole, the distant lights of Manhattan flickering on the horizon. "Watson, Anna, prepare yourselves. The game is far from over. In New York, we'll face the maestro on his own stage." The ship docked at dawn, the city's skyline a jagged silhouette against the rising sun. Holmes carried the violin case, his mind already mapping the streets of New York. The trail led to a forgotten theater, where the Cursed Strings' final performance awaited. As they stepped onto the dock, Holmes's eyes gleamed with determination, ready to confront the maestro and silence the haunting melody forever. Chapter 9. The Phantom Stage. The air in New York's underbelly hung heavy with the scent of damp stone and forgotten dreams. The city's pulse thrummed above, but here, in the labyrinthine alleys and crumbling warehouses of the Bowery, time seemed to stagnate, trapped in the shadows of a metropolis that had outgrown its past. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson navigated the narrow streets, their footsteps muffled by a thin layer of grime that coated the cobblestones. The derelict theater, their destination, loomed ahead, a decaying monument to a bygone era of vaudeville and melodrama, its marquee letters long since fallen, leaving only jagged scars of rust. Holmes's sharp eyes scanned the facade, noting the boarded windows and the faint glow of a single gas lamp flickering at the entrance. "This place," he murmured, his voice low but resonant, "is a mausoleum for ambition. Yet something stirs within." Watson, clutching his revolver beneath his overcoat, felt a chill that had little to do with the autumn wind. The tale of the cursed violin strings had led them across the Atlantic, from London's elite circles to this forsaken corner of New York, and the weight of their pursuit pressed heavily upon him. The young violinist, Clara Hensley, had been their unexpected guide. Found stowed away on the steamship, her story had unraveled like a threadbare tapestry. Her father, a luthier, had been ruined by the cursed strings, driven to madness by their hypnotic hum. She had spoken of this theater as the crucible where the strings' power was first tested, a place where music became a weapon. Now as they approached, her words echoed in Watson's mind. "The stage is alive, Doctor. It remembers." Holmes pushed open the theater's door, its hinges groaning in protest. The interior was a cavern of shadows, the air thick with dust motes that danced in the faint light filtering through cracked skylights. The auditorium stretched before them, its rows of moldering seats like silent spectators to a forgotten tragedy. The stage, framed by tattered velvet curtains, seemed to beckon, its wooden boards warped but still gleaming faintly under the grime. "Stay close, Watson," Holmes said, his cane tapping the floor as he moved forward. "This place is not as abandoned as it appears." His keen senses caught the faintest disturbance, a scuff of a boot, a whisper of fabric somewhere in the darkness. Watson tightened his grip on his revolver, his heart pounding as they ascended the creaking steps to the stage. The stage itself was a relic, littered with broken props and faded playbills. In the center stood an ancient phonograph, its brass horn glinting like a watchful eye. Beside it lay a pile of wax cylinders, each labeled with cryptic symbols that matched the inscriptions Holmes had found on the cursed strings. He knelt, examining the cylinders with a jeweler's precision. "These are no ordinary recordings," he said, his voice tinged with fascination. "The strings' vibrations have been captured here, amplified by some ingenious mechanism. Listen." He wound the phonograph and set a cylinder spinning. A low, keening note filled the air, not unlike the haunting melody that had felled Eleanor Grayson in London. But this sound was deeper, more insidious, burrowing into Watson's mind like a splinter. His vision blurred, and for a moment he saw not the theater but a vast, starless void, its edges pulsing with the rhythm of the strings. He staggered, clutching Holmes's arm. "Steady, Watson," Holmes said, stopping the phonograph with a swift motion. The sound died, and Watson's senses cleared, though his pulse still raced. The string's alloy, combined with this device, creates a resonance that disrupts the mind's equilibrium. It's not supernatural, but diabolically clever. "Someone has weaponized acoustics." Watson, shaken but resolute, nodded. "Who would create such a thing? And why here?" Holmes's eyes narrowed as he scanned the stage. This theater was a testing ground. The society we pursue, those who guard. The Strings' secret used this place to perfect their craft. But they've left a trail, and trails can be followed. He moved to the wings, where a trapdoor lay half hidden beneath a pile of rotting canvas. With a heave, he opened it, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The passage. Below was a maze of tunnels, likely remnants of the city's old smuggling routes. The walls glistened with moisture, and the air grew colder as they descended. Holmes's lantern cast jagged shadows, illuminating graffiti scratched into the stone symbols matching those on the cylinders. Watson's unease grew with each step, the weight of the earth above them pressing on his nerves. "Holmes, this feels like a trap," he whispered. "Undoubtedly," Holmes replied, his tone almost cheerful. "But traps are merely puzzles. With higher stakes, keep your wits about you." His confidence, as always, was a lifeline. Though Watson couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, the tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber, its ceiling supported by rusted iron beams. At its center stood a makeshift stage, smaller but eerily similar to the one above, surrounded by rows of wooden chairs arranged in a semicircle. On the stage was another phonograph, larger and more ornate, connected to a series of copper wires that snaked along the floor and vanished into the walls. Scattered around were more wax cylinders, some shattered, others pristine, and a collection of violin strings coiled like serpents in a glass case. Holmes approached the phonograph, his fingers tracing the wires. "This is no mere recording device," he said. "It's a transmitter, designed to broadcast the string's resonance over a distance. Imagine the chaos if this were activated in a crowded hall." His voice held a rare note of urgency, and Watson realized the scope of the danger they faced. Before they could investigate further, a low rumble echoed through the chamber. The ground shook, and dust rained from the ceiling. Watson spun, revolver drawn, as footsteps echoed from the tunnel they'd entered. Holmes were not alone. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man in a tattered overcoat, his face obscured by a scarf. He held a crude device, a metal box with a blinking light, and his eyes gleamed with fanatic intensity. "You shouldn't have come here," he rasped, his voice thick with an accent Watson couldn't place. "The music must play." Holmes stepped forward, his demeanor calm but commanding. "And who, pray, are you to decide what music the world hears? Step aside, or we shall have words." The man laughed, a harsh grating sound, and pressed a button on the device. The phonograph whirred to life, and the cursed string's melody filled the chamber, sharper and more piercing than before. Watson felt his knees buckle, his thoughts scattering like leaves in a storm. Images flashed through his mind, memories of Afghanistan, of Mary's face, of blood on sand twisted into a kaleidoscope of fear. Holmes, however, stood unmoved, his eyes locked on the man. With a swift motion, he drew his cane and struck the phonograph, shattering its horn. The sound faltered, and Watson's mind cleared, though his body trembled. The man snarled, lunging at Holmes with a knife, but Watson, fueled by adrenaline, tackled him to the ground. The device clattered across the floor, its light winking out. "Excellent work, Watson," Holmes said, binding the man's wrists with a length of cord from his pocket. "But we're not done yet." He examined the device, a crude but effective trigger for the phonograph. "This suggests a larger network. Our friend here is merely a pawn." The man spat, his scarf slipping to reveal a gaunt face marked by scars. "You'll never stop the maestro," he hissed. "The strings will sing, and the world will listen." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "The maestro, you say? A theatrical title for a theatrical mind. Tell me, where is this maestro now?" The man clamped his lips shut, but Holmes's gaze was unrelenting. He leaned close, his voice low and precise. "You have two choices. Speak, and I ensure you face justice with leniency, or remain silent, and I leave you to the mercy of New York's finest, who are less forgiving of foreign saboteurs." The man's resolve wavered, and after a tense moment, he muttered, "The old warehouse on Pier 13. That's where he works. But you're too late. The performance begins tonight." Holmes straightened, his expression grim. "Watson, we must move quickly. If this maestro is preparing a performance, it could endanger countless lives." He turned to the man. "You will remain here. The police will find you soon enough." They left the man bound and gagged, his curses muffled by the scarf. As they retraced their steps through the tunnels, Watson's mind raced. "Holmes, what kind of performance could use these strings? And how do we stop it?" Holmes's eyes gleamed in the lantern light. "The strings' power lies in their ability to manipulate the mind through sound. A large-scale performance, amplified by devices like these, could induce mass hysteria or worse. We must find this warehouse and disrupt their plans before the curtain rises." The journey to Pier 13 was a blur of cobbled streets and flickering gaslights. The warehouse district was a maze of towering structures, their silhouettes stark against the night sky. The air carried the tang of salt and tar, and the distant lapping of the Hudson River underscored the city's restless hum. Holmes moved with purpose, his senses attuned to every detail: the scuff of a boot, the glint of a window, the faint hum of machinery from within one of the warehouses. "There," he whispered, pointing to a hulking building with a faded sign reading Harrow and Sons Imports. The name sent a jolt through Watson. Lord Reginald Harrow, the music patron from London, had been linked to the cursed strings in the cipher they'd decoded. The connection was no coincidence. They slipped inside through a rusted side door, finding themselves in a cavernous space filled with crates and machinery. At the far end, illuminated by flickering oil lamps, was a makeshift stage, not unlike the one in the theater. On it stood a figure cloaked in black, adjusting a complex array of phonographs and wires. The cursed strings, coiled in a glass case, glinted ominously beside him. Holmes motioned for Watson to stay low, and they crept closer, using the crates as cover. The figure's movements were precise, almost reverent, as he prepared the equipment. Watson caught fragments of muttered words: resonance, control, the final act, and his blood ran cold. This was no mere craftsman. This was the architect of the strings' power dot. As they neared, a floorboard creaked under Watson's foot. The figure spun, his face hidden by a mask that gleamed like polished bone. "Holmes," he said, his voice smooth and chilling. "I wondered when you'd find me." Holmes stepped into the light, his cane held loosely but ready. "Victor Crane, I presume? Your penchant for dramatics betrays you. Cease this madness, and no harm will come to you." Crane laughed, a sound that echoed through the warehouse. "Madness? This is art, Mr. Holmes. Music that bends the will, reshapes the world. You cannot stop progress." Watson's hand tightened on his revolver, but Holmes raised a hand to stay him. "Progress that enslaves minds is no progress at all," Holmes said. "Your strings are a poison, and I will not allow them to spread." Crane's eyes narrowed. "Behind the mask, you're too late. The performance is set. At midnight, the strings will sing, and New York will dance to my tune." He gestured to the array of phonographs, each connected to a network of wires that stretched beyond the warehouse. "This city will be my stage." Holmes's gaze flicked to the equipment, calculating. "Watson, the wires," he said softly. "Sever them." Watson lunged for the nearest bundle of wires, but Crane was faster, activating a switch. The phonographs roared to life, and the cursed strings melody filled the warehouse, sharper and more potent than ever. Watson felt his mind fraying, his body heavy as if wading through molasses. He saw Holmes falter, his cane slipping from his grasp, but Holmes was not so easily undone. With a surge of will, he drew a small tuning fork from his pocket and struck it against a crate. The pure, clear note cut through the string's resonance, jarring Watson's senses back to clarity. "Now, Watson!" Holmes shouted. Watson tore at the wires, ripping them free as the phonograph sputtered and died. Crane roared in frustration, drawing a pistol, but Holmes was upon him, disarming him with a deft twist of his cane. The two grappled, Crane's strength surprising for his lean frame, but Holmes's precision prevailed. He pinned Crane to the ground, securing his wrists with the same cord he'd used in the theater as the melody faded. Watson caught his breath, his heart still racing. "Is it over?" he asked, scanning the warehouse for more threats. Holmes shook his head, his expression grim. "Not yet. Crane's plans are too elaborate for one man. There's a larger performance planned, and we must return to London to stop it." He unmasked Crane, revealing a gaunt, feverish face, eyes burning with a mix of genius and madness. Victor Crane, disgraced composer, seeking to reclaim his glory through chaos. Crane sneered. "You think you've won, Holmes? The strings are eternal. Others will take my place." Holmes's smile was cold. "Let them try. I've faced worse than you and prevailed." He turned to Watson. "Come, old friend. We have a ship to catch and a conspiracy to unravel." As they left Crane for the authorities, Watson glanced back at the stage, the cursed strings still gleaming in their case. The warehouse was silent now, but the echo of the melody lingered in his mind, a reminder of the power they'd barely contained. The journey back to London loomed, and with it, the final act of the mystery of the cursed Violin Strings. Chapter 10. The Composer's Revenge. The air in New York's underbelly was thick with the scent of damp wood and forgotten dreams. A fitting shroud for the derelict theater where Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson had traced their quarry. The building loomed like a decaying monument, its once grand facade now peeling, its windows dark as the secrets it held. Inside, the trail of Victor Crane, the disgraced composer and mastermind behind the cursed violin strings, had led them to a hidden studio, a lair where the threads of his malevolent symphony were being woven. Holmes moved silently through the shadowed corridors, his sharp eyes catching the glint of a discarded violin bow, its horsehair frayed like the nerves of the city itself. Watson, close behind, gripped his revolver, his breath steady but his heart racing with the weight of their discovery. The young violinist, Clara Hensley, had revealed on the steamship that Crane's obsession with the cursed strings was not merely ambition but vengeance, a vendetta against the musical elite who had cast him out years ago. Now in this forsaken place, they were steps away from confronting the man who sought to bend minds through music. The corridor opened into a cavernous room, its ceiling vaulted with cracked plaster cherubs staring down like silent judges. At the far end, illuminated by a single gas lamp, stood Victor Crane. He was a wiry figure, his hair a wild tangle of gray, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. Before him, a workbench was strewn with coils of gleaming strings, each shimmering with an unnatural luster. A phonograph in the corner spun a wax cylinder, emitting a low, hypnotic hum that seemed to pulse through the air, making Watson's temples throb. Holmes raised a hand, signaling Watson to hold position. "Mr. Crane," he called, his voice cutting through the hum like a blade. "Your composition is nearing its finale, but I fear the audience will not applaud." Crane spun around, his lips curling into a sneer. "Holmes," he spat, his voice a mix of disdain and admiration, "you've followed the melody to its source, but you're too late. The strings are ready, and soon the world will dance to my tune." Holmes stepped forward, his cane tapping the floor with deliberate rhythm. "A tune of control, is it? Your alloyed strings, vibrating at frequencies that mesmerize, clever, but flawed. The human mind is not so easily swayed." Crane's laugh was sharp like a snapped string. "Flawed? You underestimate the power of music, detective. It's not just sound, it's the soul's language. With these strings, I'll conduct the elite of this world like puppets, and they'll thank me for it." Watson, unable to restrain himself, stepped forward. "You're mad, Crane. You'd ruin lives for your petty revenge?" Crane's eyes narrowed, and he gestured to the phonograph. "Petty? They stripped me of my career, my name, my music. They called me a fraud, a hack. But these strings, crafted from an alchemical secret older than their pompous salons, will make them beg for my genius." Holmes's gaze flicked to the workbench, noting a glass vial filled with a silvery liquid, likely the alloy's base. "Your genius is undeniable," he said, his tone measured. "But your method is chaos. Tell me, Crane, how did you refine the alloy?" The guild in Vienna was cagey, but they hinted at a partner. Crane's sneer faltered, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "You think you can unravel my work with words? The alloy is mine, perfected through years of toil. No partner, no. Guild, just me." Holmes tilted his head, his eyes gleaming. "A lie. Your hands are steady, but your left cuff is stained with ink not used in this studio. Correspondence, perhaps, with someone who supplied the formula?" Crane's fingers twitched toward a violin on the workbench, its strings taut and gleaming. "You're fishing, Holmes. But you're in my domain now." He seized the violin and drew the bow across the strings, unleashing a sound that was both beautiful and unbearable, a piercing wail that seemed to claw at the edges of Watson's mind. Watson staggered, his revolver slipping from his grip as the sound enveloped him. His vision blurred, memories of Afghanistan flashing unbidden sand, blood, the scream of a wounded comrade. "Holmes!" he gasped, clutching his head. Holmes, however, stood unmoved, his eyes locked on Crane. "Fascinating," he murmured. "The frequency targets the brain's emotional centers, amplifying suggestibility, but it lacks precision. You've overreached, Crane." With a swift motion, Holmes darted to the phonograph and smashed the wax cylinder with his cane. The hum ceased, and Watson blinked, shaking off the haze. Crane snarled, lunging for another cylinder, but Holmes was faster, kicking the phonograph over with a crash. "You think that stops me?" Crane roared, raising the violin again. "These strings don't need a machine, they sing on their own." Holmes's lips curved into a faint smile. "Then let's test their limits." He pulled a tuning fork from his pocket, struck it against the workbench, and held it aloft. The pure, resonant tone clashed with the violin's wail, creating a dissonance that made Crane wince. The strings vibrated wildly, their unnatural glow flickering. Watson, recovering, retrieved his revolver and aimed it at Crane. "Drop the violin now." Crane hesitated, his eyes darting between Holmes and Watson. Then, with a manic grin, he hurled the violin at Holmes and bolted for a side door. Holmes dodged, the instrument shattering against the wall, its strings snapping with a sound like breaking glass. "After him!" Holmes shouted, already sprinting. The chase led through a maze of backstage passages, past rotting curtains and broken stage lights. Crane was fast, his desperation lending him speed, but Holmes's relentless pace closed the gap. Watson, panting, kept up, his military training kicking in. They emerged onto a narrow catwalk high above the theater's auditorium, the floor. Below, a dark abyss of empty seats. Crane skidded to a halt at the catwalk's end, trapped against a rusted railing. He turned, clutching a small knife, his face a mask of defiance. "You can't stop it, Holmes. The strings are out there, others will finish what I started." Holmes slowed, his expression calm but unyielding. Your society is crumbling. Crane, Lady Voss is in custody, your Vienna guild exposed. Your legacy is a cacophony, not a symphony. Crane's laugh was bitter. You think you've won? The elite will always crave control, and my strings are just the beginning. You'll see, Holmes' music will rule them all. Watson stepped forward, his revolver steady. Enough, you're coming with us. But Crane's eyes gleamed with a final act of defiance. He lunged at Holmes, knife flashing. Holmes sidestepped, grabbing Crane's wrist and twisting it until the knife clattered to the catwalk. With a swift jab, Holmes struck Crane's temple, and the composer crumpled. Unconscious, Watson lowered his revolver, exhaling. That was too close, Holmes. His music, it's like a weapon. Holmes nodded, binding Crane's hands with a length of cord from his pocket. A weapon of the mind, Watson. But every weapon has a countermeasure. His strings rely on precise frequencies. Disrupt them, and the effect collapses. As they dragged Crane back through the theater, Watson glanced at the shattered violin on the studio floor. Do you think he was right about others continuing his work? Holmes's eyes narrowed. The aloes formula is still out there, and the society's reach extends beyond Crane. We've stopped the composer, but the score remains. They handed Crane to the New York police, who were waiting outside the theater, alerted by a telegram Holmes had sent before entering. As the officers took Crane away, his mutterings about music and power faded into the city's din. Back at their temporary lodgings, a cramped hotel room overlooking the Hudson, Holmes sat by the window, his violin resting on his knee. Watson, nursing a glass of brandy, watched his friend. What now, Holmes? Back to London? Holmes plucked a single note. Its purity is stark. Contrast to Crane's cursed strings. Not yet, Watson. Crane mentioned a final performance, a grand event in London. If there's truth to it, we've only silenced the prelude. Watson frowned. Another performance? With those strings? Holmes's gaze was distant, fixed on the river's shimmering surface. The strings are a tool, Watson, but the intent. Behind them is the true danger. Someone else pulls the strings of this conspiracy, and I intend to find them. The night stretched on, the city's pulse a faint echo of the mystery still unfolding. Holmes played a soft melody, each note a promise, to unravel the final threads of the cursed strings legacy. Chapter 11. The return to Baker Street. The fog had lifted from London streets, but a heavier pall hung over Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson as their steamer docked at the port of London. The transatlantic pursuit of Victor Crane, the disgraced composer behind the cursed violin strings, had left them weary yet resolute. The air was thick with the tang of coal and salt, and the distant chime of Big Ben welcomed them back to a city teetering on the edge of a new conspiracy. The cursed strings, with their hypnotic alloy, were no longer a mere curiosity, but a weapon poised to manipulate the minds of the powerful. Holmes's sharp eyes scanned the bustling docks, noting every face, every shadow, as if the city itself were a chessboard and he its grandmaster. Watson, Holmes said, his voice cutting through the clamor of porters and gulls. We have returned to the heart of the matter. Crane's arrest in New York was but a prelude. His final performance, if my deductions are correct, is set to unfold here, in London's grandest stage. Watson adjusted his hat, his face etched with the strain of their journey. You mean the Royal Opera House? That's where the world leaders are gathering for the diplomatic gala in 3 days' time. Surely Crane's confederates wouldn't dare. They would, and they will, Holmes interrupted, his tone as cold as the Thames. The string's power to sway minds is too potent for his followers to abandon. We must act swiftly. Their hansom cab rattled through the city, the familiar spires of Westminster rising through the haze. At 221B Baker Street, Mrs. Hudson greeted them with a tray of tea and a worried frown. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, you look half-starved. And those telegrams piling up. Inspector Lestrade's been frantic. Holmes waved a dismissive hand. Already. sifting through the stack of messages on the mantel. Lestrade's panic is as predictable as the tides, Mrs. Hudson, but his information may prove useful. Watson sank into an armchair, rubbing his temples. What's our next move, Holmes? Crane's in custody, but his society, the Order of the Lyre, you called them, still has the strings. And that note we found in New York mentioned a final symphony at the gala. Holmes's eyes gleamed as he unfolded a telegram. Indeed, Watson. This confirms it. Lestrade reports unusual activity at the Royal Opera House deliveries of unmarked crates, performers hired without vetting, and a sudden change in the program to include a violin solo. The order is bold, but not subtle. He paced the room, his violin case untouched in the corner, a silent reminder of the case's stakes. We must infiltrate the gala, Watson. But first, we need to understand the strings mechanism fully. Their alloy reacts to specific frequencies, amplifying the mind's susceptibility. If played in a controlled setting, like the opera house, the effect could sway an entire audience. Watson frowned, his medical mind grappling with the implications. You're saying they could hypnotize world leaders? To what end? Political chaos? Or control, Holmes replied, pausing by the window. Imagine a treaty signed under duress, or a war sparked by a single note. The order seeks power, not chaos, but we shall turn their weapon against them. The next morning, Holmes summoned Inspector Lestrade to Baker Street. The Scotland Yard man arrived, his mustache twitching with agitation. Holmes, this gala is a nightmare. Security's tight as a drum, but we've got reports of strangers loitering near the opera house, and the Home Office is breathing down. My neck. Lestrade, Holmes said, leaning forward. You will grant us access to the opera house tonight, before the gala. Watson and I will pose as stagehands to inspect the venue. The strings must be neutralized before the performance. Lestrade hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but if this goes wrong, it's my head. What do you need? A detailed plan of the opera house, including its acoustics and electrical systems, Holmes replied. And a list of all performers, particularly the violinist. As Lestrade departed, Holmes turned to Watson. We'll need disguises, nothing elaborate, just enough to blend in. And I'll require your assistance in a small experiment. That evening, under the cover of dusk, Holmes and Watson slipped into the Royal Opera House, their faces smudged with grease paint to mimic the weary look of stagehands. The grand auditorium was a cathedral of opulence, its chandeliers casting golden light on crimson seats and gilded balconies. Yet beneath the splendor, an undercurrent of tension pulsed. Stagehands moved crates with unusual care, and a faint hum eerily familiar emanated from the orchestra pit. Holmes's eyes darted to the stage, where a lone violin rested on a stand, its strings glinting like liquid silver. There it is, Watson, the instrument of our foe. They approached, blending with the crew. Holmes knelt beside the violin, his fingers hovering over the strings. The same alloy, he murmured, but the bridge has been modified a tuning. Mechanism to amplify the frequency. Clever. Watson glanced around, wary of prying eyes. Can you disable it? Not yet, Holmes replied. To break the string's power, we must disrupt their resonance at the source. The opera house's acoustics are designed to amplify sound. If we can alter the stage's reflective surfaces, we can dampen the effect. They moved to the wings, where Holmes inspected the stage's rigging and panels. He produced a small notebook, sketching the layout with rapid precision. These panels, he said, pointing to the wooden screens behind the orchestra, can be adjusted to diffuse sound rather than reflect it. A subtle change, but enough to weaken the string's influence. As they worked, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall woman in a stagehand's apron, her face half hidden by a cap. You're not crew, she said, her voice low and sharp. What are you doing here? Holmes turned, his expression calm but piercing. Merely ensuring the performance goes smoothly, madam. "And you are?" She hesitated, then stepped closer. "Clara Vane, assistant stage manager. I've seen you poking around that violin. It's not yours to touch." Watson tensed, but Holmes's smile was disarming. "A precaution, Miss Vane. We've heard rumors of irregularities with the instrument. Surely you've noticed its unusual sound." Clara's eyes flickered with unease. "I have. It's unsettling. But the new violinist, Mr. Duval, insists on using it. Says it's a masterpiece." "Duval," Holmes repeated, filing the name away. "And where might we find him?" "He's rehearsing in the East Wing," she said, then lowered her voice. "But be careful. He's strange. Watches everyone like he's waiting for something." Holmes thanked her and led Watson toward the East Wing, where the faint strains of a violin echoed through the corridors. The melody was haunting, its notes weaving a spell that made Watson's pulse quicken. "Holmes, that's the same hum from the Adelphi Theater." "Indeed," Holmes said, his voice taut. "Duval is no mere performer. He's one of the Order's operatives." They reached a rehearsal room, its door ajar. Inside, a man with sharp features and silver-streaked hair played the violin with feverish intensity. The strings' hum filled the space, vibrating in Watson's bones. Holmes signaled for silence, observing Duval's movements. The violinist's eyes were half closed, as if entranced, but his fingers moved with mechanical precision. Holmes whispered, "Notice the bow, Watson. It's weighted differently, likely to enhance the string's effect. We must act before he performs at the gala." They retreated to plan, but as they passed a storage room, Watson caught a glint of metal, a crate marked with the crescent moon and lyre symbol from Eleanor Grayson's box. "Holmes, look!" Holmes pried open the crate, revealing coils of the cursed strings, their sheen almost alive in the dim light. "A reserve supply," he said. "They're prepared for contingencies. We'll take one coil for analysis, but the rest must be destroyed." As Watson reached for a coil, a shadow lunged from the darkness, a burly man wielding a wrench. Watson dodged, his military instincts kicking in, and grappled the attacker to the floor. Holmes swiftly bound the man's wrists with a length of rope from the stage rigging. "Who sent you?" Holmes demanded, his voice like steel. The man spat, his accent thick with Eastern European tones. "You can't stop the symphony. The strings will sing, and the world will listen." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "We shall see." They left the man for Lestrade's men to handle, and returned to Baker Street with the stolen coil. In Holmes's laboratory, he set to work, analyzing the strings under a microscope. "The alloy contains traces of a rare mineral, Watson, one that resonates at a frequency that affects the brain's alpha waves. It's no curse, it's science, weaponized." Watson watched as Holmes rigged a small device, a tuning fork modified to emit a counter-frequency. "This," Holmes said, "will disrupt the string's resonance during the performance. But we must place it strategically near the stage's acoustic focal point." The night of the gala arrived, the opera house ablaze with light and filled with the chatter of dignitaries. Holmes and Watson, now disguised as waiters, moved through the crowd, their eyes on Duval, who stood poised with the violin. The program began with a flourish of orchestral music, but as Duval took the stage, the air grew heavy, the strings hum rising like a tide. Holmes slipped into the orchestra pit, placing the tuning fork device beneath the stage. As Duval began his solo, the cursed strings sang, their melody weaving a spell over the audience. Watson felt his mind cloud, his thoughts sluggish, but then a faint, discordant note cut through the tuning fork's counter-frequency. The audience blinked, their trance broken. Duval's face twisted with rage as he realized his plan was failing. Holmes emerged, signaling Lestrade's men, who moved to apprehend the violinist. But Duval, desperate, drew a knife and lunged at Holmes. Watson tackled him, pinning him to the stage as the crowd gasped. The gala ended in chaos. But the leaders were safe, the strings' power neutralized. Back at Baker Street, Holmes sat by the fire, the coil of strings in a sealed case. The order is weakened, Watson, but not defeated. Duval was a pawn. The true mastermind remains. Watson nodded, exhaustion mingling with relief. What now? Holmes's eyes glinted with resolve. We prepare for the final act. The stage is set, and we shall not be outplayed. The fire crackled, and outside, London slept, unaware of the danger averted. But for Sherlock Holmes, the mystery of the cursed violin strings was far from over, its final notes yet to be played. Chapter 12. The saboteurs strike. The Royal Opera House glittered under the gaslights, its grand auditorium a mosaic of velvet and gold, filled with the murmurs of diplomats and dignitaries. The diplomatic gala was in full swing, a spectacle of international unity meant to cement alliances. Yet Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson knew it teetered on the edge of catastrophe. The cursed violin strings, with their hypnotic alloy, had been neutralized by Holmes's counter-frequency device, but the Order of the Lyre, the shadowy cabal behind the strings, was not so easily defeated. As the orchestra tuned for the next act, an undercurrent of menace pulsed beneath the evening's elegance. Holmes, disguised as a waiter in a crisp black uniform, moved through the crowd with a tray of champagne flutes, his keen eyes scanning every face. Watson, similarly attired, lingered near the orchestra pit, his heart still racing from their confrontation with the violinist Duval. The man was now in Inspector Lestrade's custody, but Holmes's warning echoed in Watson's mind. Duval was a pawn, and the true mastermind remained at large. Watson, Holmes whispered, sidling up beside him. Observe the balcony on the left. The gentleman in the emerald waistcoat, he's been watching the stage too intently, and his hand hasn't left his pocket. Watson squinted through the dim light. The man, lean and hawkish, stood alone, his gaze fixed on the violin now resting on a stand, its strings glinting with that unnatural sheen. You think he's one of them? Undoubtedly, Holmes replied, his voice low. The Order would not entrust their plan to a single performer. There's a saboteur among us ready to restore the strings' power. The orchestra struck up a lively overture, and the audience settled, their attention on the stage. Holmes had rigged the acoustic panels to diffuse the strings' hypnotic resonance, but the device a modified tuning fork hidden beneath the stage required constant monitoring. Any interference could unleash the strings' full effect, bending the minds of the world's leaders to the Order's will. As the overture ended, a new performer, a young woman with auburn hair, took the stage. Her program listed a solo piece, Lament of the Sirens, an unfamiliar work. Holmes's eyes narrowed. That's not on the original program, Watson. The Order has made their move. Before Watson could respond, a faint hum rose from the violin. Chillingly familiar. The audience leaned forward, their expressions softening, as if drawn into a dream. Watson felt his own thoughts blur, a fog creeping into his mind. Holmes, it's happening again. Holmes seized Watson's arm, pulling him toward the wings. The device has been tampered with. Stay sharp, Watson. We must find the saboteur before the solo begins. They slipped backstage, where stagehands bustled amid ropes and pulleys. The hum grew louder, vibrating in the air like a living thing. Holmes's gaze darted to the lighting rig above, where a shadow moved, a figure crouched among the beams, tampering with a panel. There! Holmes hissed, pointing. They climbed a narrow ladder to the catwalk, their footsteps muffled by the orchestra's swell. The figure, cloaked in black, was adjusting a strange device wired to the stage's electrical system. Holmes recognized it instantly. A resonator, designed to amplify the string's frequency beyond his countermeasure. Stop! Holmes shouted, his voice cutting through the music. The figure spun, revealing a woman's face, sharp-featured and fierce. You're too late, Holmes, she snarled. her accent tinged with a Baltic lilt. "The symphony will play, and the world will bend." Watson lunged, but she was swift, dodging and hurling a wrench at him. It grazed his shoulder, and he stumbled, clutching the railing. Holmes leapt forward, grappling with the woman. She fought with surprising strength, her movements precise, trained. "You can't stop progress." She spat, drawing a small dagger. Holmes twisted her wrist, forcing the blade to clatter to the catwalk. "Progress? You seek control, not advancement." "Who leads the order?" She laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "You'll never know. The strings are only the beginning." Watson recovered, tackling her from behind. Together, they pinned her, binding her hands with a length of rigging rope. The hum faltered, and the audience's murmurs grew agitated, as if waking from a trance. Holmes knelt by the resonator, dismantling it with swift, practiced movements. "Watson, get to the stage. Ensure the violin is removed." Watson descended, his shoulder throbbing, and reached the orchestra pit just as the soloist began her piece. The strings' hum intensified, but without the resonator, its effect was weakened. Watson seized the violin from the stand, ignoring the soloist's protests, and carried it backstage where Holmes was waiting. "Well done, Watson," Holmes said, inspecting the instrument. "But we're not out of danger. The order has planned for contingencies. This woman, she's not acting alone." They handed the saboteur to Lestrade's men, who had arrived in force. The inspector, red-faced and harried, barked orders to secure the venue. "Holmes, this is madness. We've got diplomats panicking, and now you're saying there's more of them?" "Always Lestrade," Holmes replied, his tone dry. "Search the auditorium for anyone carrying a crescent moon and lyre emblem. The order's members are marked by it." As Lestrade's men fanned out, Holmes and Watson retreated to a quiet corner of the backstage, where Holmes examined the violin. "The strings are identical to those we found in New York," he said. "But the bow, look here, Watson. It's been weighted with a conductive metal, enhancing the alloy's effect." Watson frowned, his mind racing. "So the bow is part of the mechanism? Could we replace it?" Holmes shook his head. "Too risky. The strings themselves are the core. We must destroy them, but not here, not until we know the order's full plan." A commotion erupted near the main entrance. A diplomat, a Russian ambassador, was shouting, his face flushed with anger. "This is an outrage. The music it made. Me see things, hear voices." Holmes's eyes glinted. "The strings' effect lingers, even weakened. Watson, we must question him." They approached the ambassador, a stout man with a walrus mustache. "Sir," Holmes said, his voice calm, but commanding, "describe what you experienced." The ambassador's eyes were wild. It was as if the music spoke to me, urging me to agree to terms I'd never consider. A trade agreement, ruinous to my country. I felt compelled. Holmes nodded, filing the information away. "Thank you, Your Excellency. Rest assured, we are addressing the cause." As they moved away, Watson whispered, "Holmes, if the strings can influence minds so precisely, the order's goal isn't just chaos, it's manipulation on a global scale." "Precisely," Holmes said, "and the gala was the perfect stage. But the saboteur's device suggests they anticipated our interference. We must search the opera house for more." They split up, Holmes combing the upper tiers while Watson checked the basement. In a storage room, Watson found another crate marked with the crescent moon and lyre. Inside were more strings, coiled like serpents, and a notebook filled with cryptic diagrams. He tucked it under his arm and hurried to find Holmes. Reunited, Holmes pored over the notebook. "These are schematics for a larger resonator," Watson won, "capable of amplifying the string's effect across a city. The order planned to use the gala as a test, but their true aim is far grander." A sudden crash interrupted them. A stagehand burst in, breathless. "Mr. Holmes, there's a fire in the prop room. It's spreading fast." Holmes's eyes narrowed. Arson a distraction. Watson, get the notebook to safety. I'll handle the fire. Watson hesitated, but Holmes was already moving, barking orders to the crew. The prop room was ablaze, flames licking at crates of costumes and scenery. Holmes seized a fire hose, directing a stream of water with precision, while shouting for the crew to evacuate. The fire was contained, but the damage revealed a hidden compartment in the wall, containing a sealed case. Holmes pried it open, revealing a single violin string, its surface pulsating with a faint glow. "The master string," he murmured, "the source of the others. Its composition is purer, more potent." Watson returned, the notebook safe. "Holmes, the schematics mention a conductor, not a musician, but a leader. Someone directing the order from within the gala." Holmes's expression darkened. "Then we've been playing to their tune. The saboteur was a decoy, meant to draw our attention. The true conductor is here, among the guests." They re-entered the auditorium, where the gala had descended into controlled chaos. Diplomats were being ushered out, but Holmes's gaze locked on a figure near the royal box, a woman in a sapphire gown, her brooch bearing the crescent moon and lyre. She moved with purpose, slipping toward a side exit. "Watson, follow her," Holmes said. "I'll secure the string." Watson pursued, weaving through the crowd. The woman was swift, her movements graceful but determined. She led him to a service corridor, where she spun, a pistol in her hand. "You're persistent, Doctor," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "But this ends here." Watson raised his hands, his mind racing. "You're the conductor, aren't you? The one pulling the strings," she smiled, cold and calculating. "Clever, but too late. The gala was a spark. The fire comes next." Before she could fire, Watson dove, knocking the pistol from her hand. They struggled, and Watson pinned her, his strength overcoming her agility. Lestrade's men arrived, taking her into custody. Holmes appeared, the master string secured in a glass vial. "Well done, Watson. This is Lady Beatrice Harrow, Lord Reginald Harrow's sister, the true mastermind." The gala ended, the audience safe, the string's power broken. Back at Baker Street, Holmes studied the master string by lamplight. "The order is crippled, Watson, but their knowledge remains. We must destroy the source, the alchemical formula itself." Watson nodded, exhausted but resolute. "And Lady Harrow?" "She'll face justice," Holmes said, but her words linger. "The fire comes next. We must be ready." The night settled over London, the opera house silent. The cursed string's melody had been stilled, but the game was not over. For Sherlock Holmes, the final act awaited.